All right, how's it going, everybody? It's Friday, and I'm still attempting to become a grill master, so this must be the CEO barbecue. Shorter one this week. I only have three companies. I want to call them three gold companies, but there's a bunch of other metals mixed up in there, as there typically are. Starting off in the Dominican Republic, close to Barrick Gold, and then going all the way up into the US to Wyoming specifically, and then back down south to Latin America, Peru specifically. Um, so there's not much more that I can say here. It's technically copper, gold, and silver in Peru that we're looking. But before any of that, fair disclaimer and an honest confession, I should not be listened to. I have no idea what I'm doing, and I've never made any serious money in this sector. Hence, I should not be considered any type of authority here. Okay, the fact that I'm talking to these CEOs doesn't mean that I'm buying their stock, and it by far doesn't mean that you should blindly do so either. Okay, please don't use this independent research nor as investment advice. Just think of this as I don't know, you don't do research by watching advertisements, right? Just think about this as an advertisement, and look at these conversations as what they really are, which is conversations and nothing more. They're general and impersonal, private conversations between two talking heads on the internet. If you don't enjoy losing money, you have to do more research. You have to go to setterplus.ca. These are Canadian companies. That's where you find the official filings of Canadian companies. You want to read the MD&A, you want to read the financial statement, and then talk to a professional investment advisor before taking your own decision in the end, because the mineral exploration, development, and mining industry is among the hardest industries to profitably deploy capital in, as there just are many risks, visible and not visible to the naked eye. So you will lose all of your money if you don't do enough research. And also just, I mean, if you like losing money, then maybe don't. The people that you're going to hear speaking here, they're literally running around the world looking for hidden treasures. Okay, that's what's happening. So it's in their nature to talk by using forward-looking statements and refer to certain events and uncertain events, actually, that may or may not happen in the future in a way that it might make it feel like they're a soothsayer. But fortunately, none of us, I wouldn't be making videos if I knew what the future was going to be. And they probably wouldn't be running junior exploration companies if they knew what the future was going to be. So please just don't blindly rely on any of this. That all said, first up for today is Precipitate Gold Corp, a gold copper exploration company with three assets in the Dominican Republic and a small piece of land in Canada. Companies listed on the TSX Ventures Exchange under the ticker symbol PRG, where an average of about 125,000 shares trade each day, with a 52-week high of 8.5 cents and a 52-week low of 5 cents. With a market cap of $8 million and 130 million shares outstanding, today this is a 6 cents stock. There are no warrants, but there are 7 million options, resulting in 137 million fully diluted shares. Management and insiders hold 6% of the company. Barrick Gold holds 9% of it, and 16% is in the hands of Strategic Metals, another company that I have had on the barbecue recently. As of the last interim financial statement, which is dated August 31, the company had $5.5 million in cash and about $2 million in current liabilities, mostly made up by an income tax bill of $1.6 million that is currently under review. So there's not too much that I can say on there, but technically it's on the balance sheet. The same financial statements also show that Precipitate spends on average about $50,000 a month on all expenses outside of exploration and investigation of the property, so keeping the lights on basically. Whereas over that same 9-month period, $58,000 was spent per month on average, again, on exploration and property investigation, most of which went to assays and consulting, leaving the overall G&A to exploration expenses ratio at about 1 to 1. But that's going to make a little bit more sense here in a minute. As always, what you want to do is head over to the company's website, though, as well as setterplus.ca to look at the most up-to-date financial numbers, data, because by the time you're watching this, things might have changed. Boredom aside, though, the Dominican Republic, not only a nice beach vacation, but also apparently a gold mining hub mined as far back historically as the Taino people, taking gold out of streams and rivers, and then reborn in a late 20th century gold mining rush that is still active to this day, with companies like Gold Quest, Unigold, and of course Barrick Gold Corp operating in the region. Barrick's operation here is actually the largest active mining and gold mining operation in Latin America, and it's also a top 5 largest gold mining operations in the world. It holds 13.4 million ounces of gold, 74.4 million ounces of silver, and almost 300 million pounds of copper. There's also been over $5 billion already invested into the build out of this project. This project is actually just significant for the Dominican Republic as well. It brings a large percentage of the country's GDP, actually. Now, Barrick's Pueblo Viejo mine here is essentially what Precipitate is looking for, at least the extension thereof. The Pueblo Viejo, that mine that Barrick operates, is a high sulfidation epithermal mineralized system that typically occurs in volcanic rocks. And explained in barbecue terms, you can just basically imagine a giant pit in which instead of cooking meat, it's cooking rocks, and instead of using barbecue sauce, it's using hot acid that came deep from deep underground, basically. And like your barbecue sauce is full of like tasty stuff that no living human really knows or understand, the hot acidic fluid is full, or hopefully in this case, full of valuable minerals that a lot of people would know. So gold and silver, copper in this case. And the barbecue sauce basically gets hot, it rises through the pit walls, starts interacting with the meat, it marinates it, and it changes its flavor by depositing those minerals into the meat in this case. So just like when you eat a steak that's being marinated, you can taste the ingredients of the sauce technically. That way you can find minerals within the rocks on their mine. Now, why I'm telling you all of this, besides in order to show you my storytelling skills, is because Barrick's presence here is significant. The Pueblo Viejo copper, gold, silver mine is right next door to Precipitate's flagship Pueblo Grande project. There's also a bit of a word war here going on because Pueblo Viejo means old village and Pueblo Grande means big village. So hopefully Jeff can defend that claim later on. Well, Jeff actually doesn't have to prove anything up alone or by himself here because Barrick saw his project naming skills, and besides buying 9% of his company, they offered him an earn-in joint venture where they can earn up to 70% interest in the big village by spending $10 million on exploration and coming out with a pre-feasibility study before April of 2026. Barrick recently provided an exploration update on the Phase 2 diamond drill program that's going on. They're saying that they drilled a total of 1,200 meters in 4 holes, which using my calculus degree tells me that it's shallow holes of about 300 meters each. And 3 of the 4 holes drilled into porous rocks made from volcanic material, which was important based on what I just told you before, that have, more importantly, been changed by that process. That's what's called high sulfidation alteration, which for those of us, again, who aren't asleep yet, means that they've been changed by those chemical processes in a way that's similar to the processes that made the old village or Pueblo Viejo mine. But although the assay results aren't out yet, they didn't find any significant mineralization to report on. But again, Barrick apparently liked what they saw, so they said that they'll have to follow it up potentially with a geophysical survey, and also adding, again, potentially a second drill to look for, I suppose, hidden treasures here. There isn't much else happening at the other 100% ownership projects in the Dominican Republic, although one of them is close to the one of the other gold deposits on the island, I suppose. And after dropping the option agreement on a lot of the Canadian land in the summer of last year, there isn't much happening in Canada either. So that actually might be a good point for me to start shutting up, Jeff, because you're now sitting on over $5 million in the bank, as I mentioned, while most juniors are begging bankers for $500,000 with a 7-year double warrant. So why aren't you drilling? Why are you not out there looking for M&A? Why is that money not being spent?
Yeah, I mean, quite frankly, that really is sort of our objective. It's been a challenging exercise to try to identify that next thing. But as you say, we've got the luxury of having Barrick spending, up to $10 million on Pueblo Grande. We've got sort of our Wanda Herrera adjacent to Gold Quest. And Gold Quest is about a 3.5 million ounce gold equivalent resource at present. And I think there's lots of expansion potential there. But our project there, Wanda Herrera, is sort of on hold. Our view has been, look, we're fully permitted there. We have multiple targets at Wanda Herrera, but until there's clarity for our neighbor in terms of a path forward, our view is the return on investment to go spend millions of dollars to find gold when the guys who have already found it next door are not able to extract it or evidence a pathway to production. We just don't think it's the right time to be spending at that project at present. So to your point or to your question, the primary objective in terms of our efforts over the last year or so has been looking for something accretive that we can bring into the company, and looking for an avenue for us to be able to leverage this cash into something that we can deploy into an asset that can generate results for Precipitate and its shareholders. We are not, in spite of the quite interesting arrangement and deal that we have with Barrick, we really are not set up to be, or have never intended to be, a project generator. So really our mandate is to try to find assets or an asset that we can acquire or have an option to acquire 100% of, and that we can deploy our exploration expertise toward. So that's been a challenging process. I mean, there's certainly opportunities out there, and in this market, I was worried months ago that maybe we were going to miss the market, and that the opportunity to identify something undervalued and be able to see value going forward was going to pass us by. But unfortunately for us in the sector, the doldrums have dragged out, and money is precious right now, and so we're being very, very selective. But ultimately, our goal here would be to find an additional asset to bring into the portfolio while those other assets are either on hold or being worked by someone else's finances.
It's also kind of bittersweet, right? Because there's plenty of deals right out there, but then also your stock is also suffering in the meantime. Or is there any specific location, jurisdiction that you're focusing on, or that you think you're going to be focusing on for the next project?
Yeah, I mean, we're fairly open-minded about that. I will say that, given some of the nuances of what's happening with the sort of permitting delays of our neighbors at Gold Quest in the Dominican Republic, I would say we feel as if we have, an adequate amount of sort of jurisdictional risk already in place with the DR, being in a position where we're waiting out some permitting for our neighbors, indicates that you're in a place where things can take some time. So, we'd like to be in a place that's a little bit more sort of jurisdictionally sound, and somewhere where you can get things done quickly. So look, we've looked in Canada, we've looked in the United States, southwestern United States. We've looked in some Latin American countries, although that's getting, you got to get a little bit more selective about where you want to be there. And we've actually looked at some places on the other side of the Atlantic. We've looked at some locations in Europe and other parts of the world that we think are quite prospective. And again, our mandate is to try to find something not dissimilar to the way things played out with Barrick and our Pueblo Viejo, is to find something that has the earmarks or the affinities of the right geological environment to potentially host something large enough to attract a major. But we're explorationists, so we're looking for something that could still be early-ish stage, so that there's significant upside there for us still. And again, then you get into deal terms and these kinds of things that can sometimes take a really good conversation or idea, and it derails because both parties don't agree on what's considered good terms. But as the company with cash, I think we feel as if we have the right to be selective and looking for something that makes sense for us. And if it doesn't, we'll be patient.
There's something where that I believe you believe is a lot of upside, and that's your own stock, or at least I hope you believe that is. Your stock is pretty much at an all-time low right now. Why not use the $5 million to buy back shares and then let Barrick do the heavy lifting for their earn in, and then pick it up from wherever it is in 2026?
Yeah, I mean, we haven't really talked a lot about a buyback concept. I would say that, really, yes, we've got 130 million shares out, and that's a number that, 5 years ago I would have thought was quite high. But, we've placed a lot of that stock in quite good hands. You mentioned at the beginning, Strategic Metals had, nearly 20 million shares. Barrick has 10 million shares. A couple of other high net worth individuals have, several million shares. So it's, I feel as if, although we've got a number out that's up there, it's not it's not a stock that can't move on good news. And so we still think that there's leverage potential. Look, we've seen our share price in recent weeks, up nearly 100% on sort of speculation of the work that was being done by Barrick, moving from sort of 5 cents to 9 cents a couple of weeks ago. So I think there is still some leverage in the stock, even under the current structure. And so, I feel as if our money could probably generate more leverage if we deploy that capital into exploration and positive news rather than a buyback campaign. If we had $20 million in the bank, maybe I'd have a different answer. But I think the current cash position, we want to keep our powder dry to be able to do something meaningful on the ground.
Fair enough. That's a fair point. Let's talk about whatever's happening on the ground right now. That thing that you're referencing to was Barry coming up with that exploration update. What do they really want to see here in order to finish their expenditure? Because I believe they're coming up now in April. They will have to have spent what, $5 million?
Correct.
Well, it's always a question like, do they continue making that spend or not? What do they want to see this year in order to know whether they continue spending money on your project?
Yeah, I mean, there's no question. My conversations with Barrick have been very clear that, they have a very clear mandate from the top, from Mark Bristow himself, that, they're really only looking to allocate exploration budgeting towards tier one assets, or assets that they believe have the potential to be a tier one asset. And that, I think, in most major companies' mind is, 500,000 ounces per year. For 10 plus years, something like that. So they're looking for monsters, and I know that Barrick have been divesting or giving up on some assets in certain parts of Latin America that just they don't believe have the criteria to match that threshold. And so the fact that Barrick is continuing to spend on our Pueblo Grande, I think, is encouraging, because, like I said, they're not interested these days in messing around with small things. Pueblo Grande is unique, though, in that it's not a standalone project per se, in the middle of nowhere or somewhere else. It's adjacent to and essentially surrounding one of their primary mining operations. So, what are they looking for? I suspect what they're looking for is, add-on ounces that they can extend out the mine life here over the course of however long that may be. Are they interested in 1 million ounces in that sort of scenario? Probably, although they wouldn't be interested in 1 million ounces, in some standalone location. But because this can feed into an existing infrastructure, I think they could be satisfied with something that's not, 5, 6, 7, 10 million ounces. And I think also what they're really probably focused on corporately is to make sure that if there's anything on this surrounding ground, that they identify it while they have an option to earn a 70% interest in it, rather than walk away prematurely, give it back, and we go out and drill some holes and find something next door to them that they gave up on. So all of that said, that has indicated to me, their indications have been that they are focused on being quite diligent here. The work that they're doing, albeit is slow, it's major company kind of pace, but I'm satisfied with the kind of work that they're doing here, which has been very diligent with respect to geochemistry, geophysics, drilling in the right places, really analyzing, as we're in the process of now, really analyzing and assessing and interpreting drill logs and drill core before continuing on. I mean, a junior company like ourselves, if we were going to be doing this same drill program, let's call it 2,000, 3,000 meters, 10 holes, our objective would be get the drills there and get the drilling conducted and completed sort of as quick as possible, because you're on the clock with drill contractors and you don't want to pay for standby time. Barrick has the luxury to be able to drill, as they've done here, drill 3 or 4 holes and then stop and assess and analyze, and if necessary, better delineate and vector for the follow-up holes that they drill. So these things are taking a little more time than we maybe would do ourselves, but I'm very pleased with the work that they're doing, and I think that latest news release indicates that they feel encouraged by how the latest holes have gone, and I'm happy with the work that they're doing as a follow-up to that.
Right, but I was referring mostly to what they were looking for specifically, because, well, obviously they're hoping for the extension of the old village Pueblo Viejo deposit, sure. But again, that news release mentions that there was no significant grades to be reported, and also high sulfidation epithermal deposits don't typically occur in clusters unless there's a special geological sort of checklist that has basically been completed over the last couple of 100 years or so. So you talk to them. What are they telling you? What's the main goal of the current drill program? What exactly are they looking for in the drill core geologically?
Yeah, I think there's sort of two goals or targets that they're sort of pursuing here. One is additional high sulfidation epithermal style mineralization that could be an offset to, because there are some structural offsets immediately to the west of Barrick's mining operations and pits. And that's where our ground sits. So there could be some sort of a geological offset there that could be part of the same system, let's say. The secondary, and that would tie in with, as you mentioned earlier, relatively shallow drilling, 300, 400 meter drill hole depth. But at the same time, there's also been some deep penetrating geophysical work that was done both by ourselves and by Barrick after they took the earn-in that indicates that there are some interesting potential porphyry targets at depth. Now, again, that's something that they may drill in this second phase or the sort of the later stage of this phase. But basically, there are sort of two different concepts, I guess you could say, that are being sort of pursued here. And I think they're letting the data sort of dictate how they tackle that exploration work going forward.
Do you know exactly where on the property they'll be drilling going forward?
I've seen some of the proposed holes. I will say that they are very fluid with their drill planning. And so they tend not to want to give too much specific details on exactly where the drill holes are going to be collared, or the collaring is easy enough because they're permitted for the drill pad locations. But in terms of drill traces and things like that, I'm not sure. So I'm not sure if this next phase of work will include any deeper holes, 700, 800 meter holes. I don't know the answer to that question at this point. The information that we put out in recent weeks was really based on sort of conversations that I've had with Barrick. And again, some information in writing, but it's not based off of a formal quarterly report from Barrick that will be much more in depth. So I will get more information from Barrick at such time as their next quarterly update to me is provided. But in the interim, I felt compelled to try to get some information to the shareholders because this drill program was announced as commencing quite some time ago. And I wanted, our shareholders to have realistic expectations on where Barrick is in the process and what the timelines might be to results. So this is sort of an intermittent news release, if you will, and we'll have more data once we get the full quarterly report from Barrick.
Can you guide anything in terms of timelines when you think that's going to happen?
I think that we may be in a position. I can't speak to assays, so I don't know when assays will come in, but we expect to have more information from Barrick with respect to the work that's been done to year end in probably sometime in April or May at the latest, I would say.
Why I'm asking this, or where I'm coming from with all this, or why is it even important to me, is because in the news release, it mentioned that they hadn't gone looking for the source of all this mineralization, right? Which could potentially be a deeply buried copper gold porphyry, which could make the entire story potentially, maybe too big of a word here, but potentially the entire country of the Dominican Republic kind of a different place for gold copper exploration and definitely production. So, I mean, anything specific on that potential for gold copper porphyry deep there?
All I can say is that I think that potential exists. I think that potential is being explored by Barrick. I can say that Barrick has brought in, one of the things I've been very pleased with Barrick in this process is the personnel that they're utilizing here goes right up the food chain as it relates to Barrick corporately. And so we've had some porphyry experts within Barrick that have reviewed a lot of the geophysical data and prior drill information. And so they are looking at that and they're looking at it quite seriously. So yeah, I think there's, definitely there's a lot of potential here that, again, this has to be systematically tested. We won't know until we know, but I do think that, in early stage exploration, what you're looking for is questions. And the ability to go and answer those questions is where the fun starts. And so Barrick is in the process of doing that now.
Yeah, it's a fair point. Early on, you don't look for answers, you look for questions. How many meters have they drilled again?
They have drilled, they drilled about 1,200 meters previously in the first phase of this program. They've done another, so we're probably close to 3,000 meters, give or take, at present. Yeah.
That's not a whole lot of drilling, and they have to come up with a PFS by 2026. How will that work? And they don't have all that much money left on the option to spend. I suppose they can overspend on the option, but how will that work?
Yeah, no, it's a great point. I mean, I think we always said when we inked this deal back in 2020 that it was nice to be able to say, hey, Barrick has to spend $10 million US over 6 years. That in and of itself, you and I could go to the Dominican Republic and spend $10 million and have the time of our lives for 6 years, and sit on the beach and drink margaritas. It doesn't mean anything, but what we put into the agreement that I think is important is that need to deliver a pre-feasibility study. So they can't just spend money willy-nilly and say, okay, well, we spent our 10 million, we now earn 70% of this. That pre-feasibility criteria is critical. So to your question, I don't know. I mean, a pre-feasibility study typically costs more than $10 million to have
Yeah.
done. So I'm not really sure what they are going to decide as such time as we get closer to the finish line on this 6 year earn-in agreement. My expectation is they've either got to spend rapidly at the back end of this in order to satisfy that. Maybe they come back to me and ask some questions about what other things we can do. Maybe they see enough to say, how do we get rid of you? I mean, who knows what kind of scenarios would play out? But as of right now, we've got a solid agreement that says, hey guys, you've got to spend $6 million and deliver a pre-feasibility study if you want 70%
Mm.
or nothing. So again, it's not like they were allowed to spend 5 million and get to 51% or something like that. It's all or nothing. So if they don't deliver that pre-fees in 2026, it's 100% precipitate once again.
And it's interesting because you mentioned that a PFS costs 10 million bucks. That's not from exploration to PFS. That's after a discovery to PFS. Typically, the PFS alone costs 10 million bucks. As in they have to do infill drilling and all that. There's a whole lot of money that has to be spent after the initial 10 million bucks. So it'd be interesting to see where that goes. I kind of felt invited though there to the Dominican Republic. I'd like to go. Don't get me wrong.
Yeah.
But do you typically go down to the pro? How often do you go down there, or do you not?
Lately, not as often now that our work is being done by Barrick and our other project is sort of on hold. But typically I would go down 2 or 3 times a year. Most of my time often is spent in the capital city in Santo Domingo, meeting with government officials and some of the other corporates, the Barrick people in the Dominican Republic, Unigold, Gold um, my legal counsel, et cetera, et cetera. But we also have a really good relationship with have had a very good relationship with the local people, specifically at near in and around Wanda Herrera, which is adjacent to Gold Quest, just because we've held that ground since 2012. So we've been in that area for a long time. We've got very good relations. So again, it's important, I think, to be present and to interact with the local people so that everybody sort of knows who you are and what your intentions are. And we've built up really good relationships by being there. But we've also got in-country personnel that allow us to get a lot done at a fraction of the cost, so that we're not having to fly Canadians in and out, just to file papers in the mining department or something like that. We've got a really good in-country group that manages everything from accounting to legal to land management, etc.
Mm. What do you have to spend money on right now, given that Barrick is doing managing the project, but also just financing it? What are you spending money on?
In terms of the ground in the Dominican Republic, very little. I mean, our holding cost that we own all of the projects, we own 100%. So we don't have any underlying option payments or work commitments or anything like that on any of the ground. So our cash in the treasury is fully discretionary. As you talked about at the beginning, we can elect to spend more or less on exploration depending on what we choose to do. The way that it works in the Dominican Republic essentially is you submit budgets on proposed work programs. And then you follow that up with reports twice a year that you submit to the government. And really what they're looking for is that you sort of are spending some money to make sure that you're not, sitting on these claims idly and doing nothing. So from time to time, we've already spent quite a significant amount on these, so they're in good standing for quite some time. But we do from time to time, we'll send crews out into the field just to, sort of do some sampling or to, some tidy up just to make sure that we're still present. But the government is aware that, as a Canadian company, involved in the capital markets, we need to see some clarity from our neighbors at Gold Quest in order for us to really get back to the kinds of expenditures that we all hoped to do in the Dominican Republic on our own. So we don't get a lot of pressure right now from the government to do much more than just kind of keep these things in good standing. So it's relatively inexpensive.
Right. Well, that's what I mentioned at the beginning was that what I calculated, might be wrong, correct me if I am, was $58,000 per month on average over that 9-month period. Do you think that's going to be less in 2024, given that they're in good standing now?
Boy, there's a lot of variables to that. The primary one being whether or not Gold Quest gets a permit for their exploitation. And again, when I say permit, I want everybody to understand that we have all of our exploration permits. So we have drill permits, we have exploration permits, as do Gold Quest. There's nothing to stop either of us from doing drilling, geophysics, geochemistry, sampling, trenching. Nothing to stop us from that. However, Gold Quest has brought its deposit to a point where they're looking to move that from that portion of their project from an exploration permit to an exploitation permit to allow them to start the development process, infill drilling, geotechnical information, environmental impact studies, that kind of thing. And that has been approved by the mining department and by the mining ministry, but is sort of in limbo with the president. And the reason I'm saying all that about your question about our expenditures is there's an election coming this year. It's in April of this year, presidential election. Like the United States, it's a 2-term maximum. So the expectation is if this president is elected or reelected here this spring, that, is in his last term anyway, and maybe some tougher decisions or slightly more challenged political decisions can be made. And the hope is that, perhaps in 2024, we see that long-awaited permit for Gold Quest granted and allowing them to move forward in the development process. If that happens, given our current cash position, we would be well positioned to be able to re-engage, recommence, activity on our Wanda Herrera adjacent to Gold Quest with that sort of market comfort that the government is in fact supportive of permitting mine development. And I think that would be a time that we could get active again and really increase our exploration expenditures in the back end of 2024.
The Pueblo Viejo mine is now going to be expanded. I believe it was announced last week-ish. The final thing, I think, what does it have? A 40-year mine life or something along those lines.
Yep.
So they're pushing for that expansion. But then the community is not as happy. I mean, you're always going to have opposition to big mines, right? And long life mines. But how's that relationship with the community developing with Barrick, with the other companies around you, and therefore also with you?
It's challenging, and there's no question that this is not, as you point out, this is not a Dominican Republic issue. I mean, this is quite common in lots of parts of the world. Barrick, I think, has indicated, I think both publicly, but also to me personally, that they're very comfortable with the Dominican Republic as a jurisdiction, as evidenced by the fact that they are expanding Pueblo Viejo. There's going to be another $1 billion in infrastructure and expansion investment into that project here coming up in the coming years. They've, for the first time, when we did the earn-in agreement with Barrick on the ground surrounding Pueblo Viejo in 2020, that was the only exploration prospect that they had anywhere in the Dominican Republic, was our earn-in agreement. They've since done a deal with Unigold over on the other side of the country near where we are and where Gold Quest is. They've acquired some claims themselves in country. So they've really increased their exploration focus in the Dominican Republic. And what's been expressed to me is this is a country where they're comfortable. This is a country where they believe they can hunker down and really be a presence here long term. So not only is Pueblo Viejo expanding and is that mine life going to extend, but I think they're looking for more. And there's no better place, in my opinion, than where we are located adjacent to Gold Quest. That belt of rocks there that would be sort of the next frontier, if you will, for mineral exploration and potential development in the Dominican Republic. So I think Barrick is comfortable with the politics. They've got a good relationship, but local community issues for Pueblo Viejo have been a constant issue. A lot of what they do in the Dominican Republic corporately is messaging. They talk about, the education initiatives that they're providing for locals, for job creation, for, environmental cleanup and all the things they're doing. It's as much a marketing campaign as a mining operation to make sure that local people appreciate what they're doing, understand what they're doing, and recognize that, all of us in the mining sector are interested in, leaving these places in as good or better positions than when we got there. So I think Barrick is doing a great job, but you're never going to please all the people all the time. And so there's always some noise in the background as it relates to Barrick and the communities.
Fair enough. As long as they're operating, that's fine. And as long as there's not really a significant risk, but sort of a watermelon move, if you will, where it's presented as green on the outside, but really it is red on the inside. But I suppose the elections that are coming up, as you mentioned, are going to prove that up or potentially explain that better. So yeah, if Barrick decides to move through to PFS and eventually build something, those are the forward-looking statements I always talk about. This is it's a big if, right? But if they do, you end up owning, excuse me, 30%. What happens with that in terms of financing for the mine build? Do you sell to Barrick with that 30%? Are they going to finance that? How does that work?
Yeah, I mean, again, one of the things that I'm fairly comfortable with and to some extent proud of is the deal. And again, the devil's in the details with these things often. And it's important that the finer points of an agreement are well thought out and negotiated. And so we've got a deal in place with Barrick whereby if, oftentimes what happens is the major company says, here's your pre-feasibility study. They give you the Cadillac operation where everything is overpriced and say to you, well, it's going to be X $100 million in capital and you're on the hook for 30%. And if you can't come up with that as a junior company, you get diluted down to a royalty. That's the usual scenario. What we've put into our agreement is we have the right to call upon Barrick to arrange for our 30% financing to avoid being diluted out by some, overpriced feasibility study or pre-feasibility study number. So we can call upon Barrick to deliver our portion of project financing so that we can maintain our interest. In doing so, however, we give up 5%. So in the end, if they arrange our financing, we go to 25%. Mm-hmm. But again, and then that gets paid back out of production. So it's a bit of a safeguard for us to make sure that we still have some leverage should there be, a meaningful deposit identified here that we don't get unduly reduced down to an NSR.
Well, I'm also trying to understand how much of weight you carry here in these negotiations, if we will. Like, what if Barrick comes back next year or in 2026 and says, we want to keep drilling it, but we need more time. So let's extend this option, this earn-in agreement that we have with you. Do you have enough weight to say, sure, let's extend it, but then you give me, 30% completely free carried interest. I don't have to do anything for the mine build out, and you just sit there. Is that even an option?
I mean, everything's possible. I mean, at such time as one party wants to renegotiate the terms of an existing agreement, it allows the other party to decide what, how flexible they want to be or what it will require to accommodate that first party. So, we went through a similar sort of scenario with Barrick in that arrangement whereby we received the $5 million US payment from Barrick. I won't tell you the initial number that they came to me and offered me for that ground, but it wasn't $5 million US. And so we were able to communicate with them, knowing that there was a strong need at Barrick's end to get this additional ground because it was ground they needed for this $1 billion infrastructure expansion. There was no real meaningful mineralization there, but we were able to, I think, leverage that quite nicely into something important and beneficial to Precipitate, which was at $5 million US. So again, I don't know that I would welcome the opportunity to have a discussion like that. I mean, we'd love to see this agreement, proceed as it's been set up. But if they were to come back to me and maybe I should interject here by saying, look, my expectation is not really that Barrick goes and finds a meaningful deposit on our ground and wants to sail off in the sunset, holding hands with Precipitate, skipping down the Garden Trail. I mean, I would suspect if something that they thought was meaningful enough to progress through a $10 million expenditure and a pre-feasibility on top of that, there may be some dialogue to be had between the two companies at that point to see what kind of arrangement could be worked out. So, we're flexible, everything's open for discussion, but, we think the wording of the agreement puts us in good standing to consider any other ideas, but to not be backed into a corner.
And again, that's all very forward looking. I'm asking questions about stuff that may or may not happen in the future. Those are well, it's important for people to understand. So this is not a done deal or anything that's happening right now. Are you talking to any of the other companies that are in the Dominican Republic? Are they asking you questions, coming to check out the projects, any involvement at all?
Yes, not so much. I mean, Pueblo Grande, that's under the sort of the stewardship of Barrick. But as it relates to Wanda Herrera, yeah, I mean, I have quite good dialogue. We've been in the Dominican Republic now since 2012, so it's been a long time, and so we have good relationships with Gold Quest, with Unigold. There's, Falcondo has a nickel deposit in country. We have relationships with them. We're a member, we're a paying member of the Dominican Chamber of Mines. So, I've sat in on many meetings in Santo Domingo with the mining community and the mining chamber in the Dominican Republic. So yeah, we communicate with other companies and have relationships with certain individuals at all of those entities. And yeah, there's some pretty good open dialogue. Again, it's one of the wonderful things of operating in a relatively small country. Access to people, whether they're government officials or other corporations, is quite simple and straightforward. So yeah, I've been happy with the relationship and the sense of community in the mining sector there.
Why I'm asking you this is because I've been wondering about the possibilities of a hostile takeover. I mean, you're a sub $8 million market cap company right now. Not something that is out of reach for Barrick or some of the bigger boys out there to even pay 100% premium, and having somewhat, a very decent chunk of retail shareholding in a market where nothing goes up. If someone offers you 100% premium, chances are they take it. So that's where I'm coming from. So maybe you can talk to me about that, if that's a possibility or a risk.
Yeah, it's always a risk. I think that we feel as if we're, sort of grossly undervalued at present when you consider the cash in the treasury in relation to the market cap. It doesn't give you much of an enterprise value on the assets that we've just been discussing throughout this conversation, in spite of the fact that, we've got one of the biggest miners in the world spending money on one of our assets, et cetera, et cetera. So, yeah, I mean, I think that, that's not, it's not out of the question. I will say that, I think we've got yes, there's a strong retail component to our share structure, but I think that, there are a lot of people that are in this story at, prices that are probably higher than where we're trading today. And I think that probably a lot of individual shareholders' expectations in terms of an exit price is probably far greater than even a 100% premium to where we are today. That said, somebody comes in and offers, cash or liquidity at a premium, who knows what one would say, but, we'd have to look at that hostile overture to see whether or not we thought it was something that made sense or not. But yeah, it's definitely something that could occur. That's part of our business. We just try to position ourselves to be able to generate real value out of those things rather than be taken out at a fraction of what you're really worth.
Right. Okay. Well, fair point. We basically talked about, as you said, the assets that we talked about. There's really 2 out of the 3 that we've been talking about. We didn't really talk much about Canada, but I don't. Maybe you can touch upon it right now. I don't expect you to be focusing or doing anything with that land holding there right now.
Correct. We took an option on some ground in Newfoundland, in and around the time when Newfoundland was sort of, catching a lot of attention. There was a lot of investment dollars there. Our projects in the Dominican Republic were, as we've discussed already. And so we thought, we want to find that something that we can expend our own capital on and try to make a discovery. We entered in an option deal. It was a relatively light deal. We got a year into it. We just didn't see enough big size potential in that project. The project was called Motherlode. But in the process of going after that core ground, we acquired a bunch of additional surrounding claims. And so that's really all we hold on to now. We've given back the core ground to the underlying vendor, and we still have, rights to the sort of that surrounding ground. The reason we've kept it and the reason it still sort of appears on our website is the project that we gave back. It may fall into the hands of someone else. Someone else may look to pick up where we left off, maybe see something we didn't, and in which case that surrounding ground that we staked for next to nothing could become, valuable to that third party. So we're hanging on to it for now, really, until its life sort of expires, and then we'll just sort of, walk away. But we keep those just as a bit of an optionality play if somebody else comes in.
I don't assume it's too much of an expense to hold either.
No, because of the work that we did. We drilled that project. All of the claims are in quite good standing in terms of the money that we've spent on the ground. Keeps them in good standing for several years. So, we'll keep those just as an optionality play, that in the event that area picks up again and we've got something that somebody may find value and we may be able to monetize. Otherwise, yeah, they'll just probably just expire in due course.
Well, then all that's left to talk about is maybe the Ponton project, the one that you drilled at the Kopi Hill gold zone target. Is that as challenged as Juan de Herrera, or how does that work?
Yeah, we went in there. We picked that up at the same time we picked up Pueblo Grande. It was part of the acquisition that we picked up. And again, we picked up all of Pueblo Grande and Ponton from an outgoing Canadian public company for $25,000 cash and escrowed shares of Precipitate. So, which we then, spent $300,000 at Pueblo Grande and then did the deal with Barrick. So, we did, I think, pretty well in terms of our entry and then doing the deal. Ponton, Barrick actually wanted as part of the earn-in agreement on Pueblo Grande, but they brought it up sort of midway through the negotiations. And I said, well, if you want Ponton as well, we have to change the terms because we didn't talk about that until now. So in the end, we elected to keep it for ourselves. We wanted to have something that we could drill ourselves that was 100% Precipitate, and Ponton was that. What we didn't, I guess, quite appreciate was it's such a good location in terms of access that it was very easy for local people to kind of see us coming and going and decide that they didn't want, in fact, they kind of thought we were Barrick. And there is this sort of, disdain for Barrick from some of the locals. And so basically we went in, we drilled a couple of holes. We had some local community leaders and others kind of come in and say, hey, we need to understand what you're doing here. We don't want, another Barrick. And we said, look, we aren't Barrick. We're just doing a drill program here. So we put it on hold to initiate dialogue with the locals. We resolved a lot of those issues, got everybody to sort of understand what our objectives were. But in the end, the market, the DR, all of these things have sort of, put us in a place where we've decided once again, look, that's on hold. Let's wait till there's a better sort of national environment for mining and exploration, and maybe the granting of the Romero permit will set the stage for people recognizing that, it's not the end of the world because a permit is granted. And we have seen a real shift in the education and information that the government is putting out to the citizens of the country to help them better understand the benefits of mining versus, sort of some of the misinformation that's out there. So Ponton is in play at such time as we elect to sort of re-engage with our own activity in the country. But I would say Juan de Herrera it's a bigger land package. It's got more targets. And so I think that if we were to get really active and want to focus somewhere, I still think Juan de Herrera has, all the sizzle of a sort of a district scale play that we could pursue for several years.
We didn't really talk too much about a timeline around that because it largely because you probably don't know, right? You don't know when or if that's going to get resolved anytime soon. But what's sort of your gut feeling or approach to it? Like with the money that you have right now, are you going to go and actively look for something basically every day because it's burning a hole in your hand? Or do you say like, okay, we wait, if something comes up, we deploy that money, but in the meantime, we're waiting for potentially Juan de Herrera to get resolved?
I guess it's a bit of a hybrid of both. So we are certainly waiting for Wanda Herrera and Gold Quest situation there to be resolved, and that would be a wonderful place for us to deploy, some of our existing capital. Again, fully permitted. We know the targets. We know the ground. I mean, it would really be, we could hit the ground running on work there. That said, because of what you just said, I don't know whether, a permit will come at all. I don't know whether it's going to come, this spring, this summer, this fall. And so, for a junior exploration company and a junior exploration investor, hurry up and wait is not a particularly compelling reason to either own or buy more of the stock. And so we do basically every day look at new opportunities and, where could we find the right fit of something that we could bring into the company that doesn't blow up the company in its acquisition. So something that we could potentially acquire on an option, acquire for some shares, commit to spend some money, on a basis to be able to earn 100%, rather than going in and handing out half of our treasury to somebody in the transaction, and then being right back to having to go raise money to do the work. What our view would be is that if we can identify an equity-based acquisition that allows us to deploy the money into the ground, and so the seller of the asset, if you will, is a shareholder, and therefore their upside is not to take the money and run. Their upside is, okay, you're aligned here. You have exposure to Precipitate stock like the rest of us. We want to see this be a success. And so, people that just want to have me come and pay them a bunch of money for them to go away, that's not the kind of deal I'm looking for. I'm looking for something where the seller of the asset still believes in it and wants to have exposure to its upside. And if we can structure something like that, we would. But so we're looking at those kinds of things every day. I would say that my geologist, my VP exploration is probably overwhelmed with the amount of data that he's looked at over the last 12 months or so. But we continue that review and evaluation, and some stuff it comes to us inbound. Some things we go out and proactively initiate conversations ourselves. But yeah, we're still trying to do that thing. But in the meantime, time ticks by, and Wanda Herrera potentially becomes ever closer to being, something that we could potentially get back to ourselves.
Fair point. This is sort of like a lot of moving particles and maybe a bit of a bottleneck, but it seems like it's going to be an interesting next 2 years for the company. I did notice that you have cut back on your marketing spend based on your latest financial statement. You're not spending almost at all, besides the conferences that you've been visiting. How come? And are you doing anything to spread the story here? And what are you planning to do basically to tell the story in those 2 years that might be crucial for the company?
Yeah, I mean, we made and partly I made, I think, a concerted decision to pare back those kinds of expenditures at a time when A, the market just didn't seem to really be there, and B, our story needed to sort of find its legs a little bit in terms of what the sizzle was for the Precipitate story. And I had hoped maybe in the earlier days that we would find that new acquisition, and that would sort of launch a bit of a new complexion or dimension to the story that we could deploy some sort of promotional dollars or marketing value onto that. Most of what we do is fairly organic, and I have good relationships with a lot of the newsletter writers, the Eric Coffins, Gwen Prestons, Brian London's, go on and on and on. So people know about the story. I've got a pretty open policy with a lot of the investors and shareholders. I get a lot of emails and phone calls from people. I talk to the capital markets world, bankers, research analysts at a number of the brokerage firms and banks. So, our story is out there and known, but I think in terms of, deploying real meaningful money at this point, I think is maybe not quite the time, but, always trying to find ways to make sure people are informed of where we are and what we're doing, but not trying to incur big expenses of traveling around the world at this point until we've got a little bit more meat on the bones with, pending results and that kind of thing.
Fair enough. I think I appreciate that approach, and I think I'm all a lot of questions here, Jeff. What am I forgetting to ask you though? What did you come here hoping to talk about, but I'm failing to bring up?
No, I think you've covered it really well, and my compliments to you on that. You're doing your homework and research and knowing the story. I think we've, in my view, right now we've sort of got three pretty critical lottery tickets here that I think does still give us that potential catalyst and leverage, and that being Barrick spending money on Pueblo Viejo, looking to make a discovery in and around a world-class known mining operation. I think, having that work being done at no expense or sort of near-term dilution to us is wonderful. B, the other sort of lottery ticket and wild card is that we've got a significant size package next to a multi-million ounce deposit owned by GoldQuest. As simple as a permit granted by the president of the country could change the value of that region at the drop of a hat. And we would be incredibly well positioned there to leverage that immediately. Again, fully permitted with drilling, exploration, a number of known targets that we've delineated in the past that require follow-up. That could be an exciting chapter. And then the third lottery ticket is we have cash and we're looking for something that we can acquire that would be a value driver to shareholders. So, I think we're pretty well positioned here. Again, cash still continues to be king in this market, and the ability to know that we're not going to have to do a raise to keep the lights on or issue shares at these levels. I think can give investors some comfort that we've got a pathway here to continue to execute on those three lottery tickets that we have, and hope to turn one or more of those into something that brings a real return on investment to investors.
All right, well, thank you, Jeff, for the overview. Maybe we can do this again when, and if you figure out what you'll be spending your money on exactly, kind of again, an interesting period you have going on here. And in the meantime, Rob, now it's on to you. I know you're waiting, so you're going to be talking to me about Relevant Gold Corp. Relevant Gold Corp is an early stage gold exploration company with 5 assets in Wyoming. Companies listed on the TSX Ventures Exchange and the ticker symbol RGC, where an average of about 11,000 shares trade each day, with a 52-week high of about 25 cents and a 52-week low of 15 cents. With a market cap of $11 million and 64 million shares outstanding today, this is a 17.5-cent stock. There are 12 million founders warrants striking at 13 cents, a little over 6 million warrants striking at 35 cents, as well as almost 4 million options striking at 35 cents as well, resulting in about 86 million fully diluted shares, with management and advisors holding over 25% of the company. Since recently, Rob McEwen holding 6.4% of the company, New Gold owns 9.9%, and other high net worth and ultra high net worth individuals holding 21% of the company, leaving 37% in the hands of retail. As of the last interim financial statement, which is dated September 30th, the company had almost $2.5 million in current assets, most of which in actual cash, and there was $700,000 on the current liability side of the balance sheet, made up by account payables with no long-term debt on there. The same financial statement also shows that Relevant spent on average about $100,000 per month on keeping the lights on and the staff happy, whereas over that same period, $425,000 was spent per month on average on exploration, about a third of which specifically on drilling and trenching, another third on claim fees, and another third on other exploration-related activities, leaving the overall G&A to exploration cost ratio at around 1:4 for the third quarter of 2023. Please do head over to the company's website as well as setterplus.ca, though, to review the most up-to-date financials by the time you're watching this, because the financial situation is likely to have changed. This is an active company, and I might be making mistakes in here, so do not rely on any of what you're hearing. Numbers aside, though, Relevant controls, as I said, 5 projects in central Wyoming, totaling a non-continuous 160 square kilometers of land. And the main thesis the company is approaching this land package with is basically orogenic shear zone-hosted gold deposits, which typically form within greenstone belts, like the Abitibi Greenstone Belt in Canada. And that's not only an example that I'm pulling out of my sleeve. Relevant Gold believes that the Abitibi Greenstone Belt is actually connected to the Wyoming Greenstone Province, if you will, potential Greenstone Province, claiming that over 2.1 billion years ago, the two provinces drifted apart. So they were one whole thing, and then they drifted apart because of the major tectonic rifting that's been happening in the region, resulting in what would technically be the extension of the Abitibi Greenstone Belt sitting in Wyoming. A couple of the 5 projects have already been drilled and are on their way to prove that thesis. The flagship Golden Buffalo project saw 3,500 meters of shallow drilling in 2022, about half of which came back showing mineralization, mostly in very narrow intercepts of about a meter, as well as the potential for a nuggety system, something I hope we can touch upon in the conversation. And then the second flagship project also saw some drilling, but that was last year in 2023, with assay results again showing mostly narrow intercepts of low grade in 10 out of the 11 shallow holes drilled there. But potentially, more importantly, there was shear hosted alteration, veining, and residual sulfides, suggesting that although no significant discovery was made on the first drill program, there still is potential to find something there. And again, sort of a check mark on the checklist of finding that lost sister of the Abitibi Greenstone Belt, if you will. The other 3 projects have not yet been drilled, but 2 of them, specifically the Shield Carissa and Bradley Peak, have seen enough surface mapping, soil sampling, and rock chip sampling to come up with drill targets, which are potentially going to be drilled this or next year, again, to be discussed in this conversation. So all early stage exploration projects here, but there's enough going on to be talked about. But in an effort not to speak too much, Rob, I'm going to give you the word, because what I'm wondering here specifically is that this sounds like a simple enough thesis where the 2 provinces drifted apart, and what was 1 province split in 2 drifted apart, essentially splitting what you believe was again over 2 million years ago, 2.1 billion years ago, not million. And so the fact that I'm calling it simple means that a potato with arms would also understand it, and it's not a new thesis, right? It's been circulating in the academic environment for a while now. It's in a decent exploration jurisdiction that's not unfamiliar with mining and with exploration. Yet none of the previous exploration activities in the region were focused on proving that thesis. How come?
Yeah, well, first of all, I think your intros are some of the best, very concise and thorough, and I really appreciate that. And you know, the whole connection of the Abitibi and the Wyoming province 2.6 billion years ago, when all the gold came into both of those systems, and then later rifting apart, taking that gold with it and ending up in Wyoming. While the idea of that being simple to you tells me, A, we're doing a much better job of synthesizing that story, because it is a complex technical, basically, thesis, and it was not built by us. This thesis was really the work of a number of really intelligent academic geologists and scientists who have done age dating work, tectonic reconstruction, matching up dike swarms, you name it, a variety of different publications that continue to support this thesis and this connection at that critical mineralization event. We're just one of the first groups to really tie it into the economic opportunity in a big way and aggressively pursue that thesis with this idea of defining a potential new mega district in Wyoming. And there were a lot of groups in the past who explored kind of the ground out there. We've seen a tremendous amount of mining activity throughout the state of Wyoming, which again is a very great place to operate. Newmont and Hecla, for example, had large land packages where some of the now relevant gold property resides in the 80s. And so there were groups that recognized the gold endowment opportunities of Wyoming, but we're really the first ones seemingly to take this approach of an Abitibi extension, which illustrates to us not only scale of opportunity, but really it puts us on the forefront of, again, defining a new district that has the ability for an exploration story to live on for centuries. A lot of other groups are looking for discoveries to ultimately find that 10, 20, 30 plus year mine life. If we're successful in our exploration efforts, we have the potential of developing an exploration story that could live on for centuries.
Right, and so essentially the difference between why nobody looked at it before is what? Because nobody thought it would be economical, or like why'd you see that?
Yeah, well, I think quite simply, Antonio, it stems from the fact that this idea was not something that was unearthed in the common economic geology literature or the exploration geology literature. This was connected deep in the academic literature. Some of our really, really, really intelligent young geologists started to see this consistency in the academic literature as they were looking at doing generative programs in Wyoming. And that bringing it to surface and then continuing to see, once you get that nugget as a researcher, as an exploration scientist, that, okay, there could be something different out there, it starts to then fester and you have to dig deeper and deeper. And that's exactly what some of our great geologists did, and really started to show this deliberate connection in time and space. And I think a lot of our predecessors probably are not digging that deep into the academic literature itself, as well as, you know, the reality of how hard it is to go after something, an idea this big as an early stage junior explorer. It takes a unique set of management and board level folks down to the boots on the ground team, and that's what we've assembled at Relevant Gold.
And they're not really, or they weren't really digging too deep because they didn't have to. Like 50 years ago, there was a bunch of low-hanging fruit. The easy stuff, as they say, has been explored and so on and so forth. So whenever I look at a new thesis, you know, a new company, first thing I'm looking at is there are going to be challenges, like every exploration project, right? In our time. And the first thing that stood out to me with you specifically was the presence of multiple shear zones, specifically with varying orientations, potentially making it more challenging for you to pick drill targets. So how do you deal with the overall structural complexity, if you will, of the different projects here?
Yeah, so structure is everything. When it comes to orogenic systems, that's one of your primary orders of control. So I'm really glad you touched on the structural component. One way we approach that is having very, very, very sharp structural geologists, specifically with folks who have experience in these systems in the Abitibi. And so our technical advisory group, we've got some extreme depth there with Dr. Dean Peterson and Tom Campbell, and one of our past advisors who is no longer with us, unfortunately, but Dr. Stephen Allard, who is an absolute structural guru. And one thing that's really interesting is Dean Peterson did his PhD in the Abitibi in the 90s. I think he studied Timmins, Kirkland Lake, and Hemlo camps. Now, at the time, I think they had produced about 115 million ounces of gold. And his thesis really was able to identify that the vast majority of that gold, I believe it was over 98% of all that gold, specifically came out of a secondary shear zones. And as we classify secondary shear zones, they came out of one specific pipe. So, and that was the Rydell P shears. And he gives a whole presentation. We actually just recorded it and we'll be putting it out on our website for people that really want to dig deeper into the technical story. And to date, as we use the analog of the Abitibi, as we explore, we have an incredible thumbprint to base our exploration off of. We've seen that all of our high-grade gold in these shear zones, regardless of their orientation from a north, south, east, west perspective, are actually these secondary P shears. So, and the way you measure those is as it relates to your major suture zone. So, and in the Abitibi, there would have been the Dester porcupine, for example. So your degree of orientation as it relates to that structure is really an identifying characteristic of which shears you want to be in. And we've been able to apply that successfully time and time again on our portfolio, where we have went out, we've identified these shear zones. And again, the ones that are hosting the gold are identically those P shears. Dean's been out mapping the rocks himself for the last 2.5, 3 years. And so we have this as a toolkit. And we look at our property and we've now identified over 50 kilometers of these prospective shear zones across our portfolio of projects.
What orientations are you targeting, or orientation singular are you targeting specifically?
So it really depends on where you're at in the system, because again, the shear zones you're looking for are the ones that are splaying off of your actual major suture zone. So where we have if you look at our South Pass map, for example, where you've got the big bounding black lines, those are your major suture zones. And it's a degree of orientation coming off of that, because those secondary shears form off of that major shear during your compression, your actual plate tectonics smashing together and creating those suture zones. You create your main suture zone, and off of that, the secondary ones. And almost all the gold is in those secondary structures at a specific angle to your main shear zone. And so that's the unique characteristic. So based on where you're at on the map and which major suture zone you're exploring along, that's gonna dictate the orientation of the secondary shears you're looking for that district, if that makes sense. So in Lewiston, you know, most of our shear zones are in a north-northeast kind of orientation coming off of our main Lewiston structure there. over in our Carissa project, for example, it's coming off of a different suture zone, and our shear zones are a bit more northwest there.
But so when you're drilling one project, for example, Golden Buffalo or whatever, do you have to constantly change the dip of the drill to go along with those shear zones, or like how does that work?
Yeah, so the most critical part in my mind of any really good grassroots drill program is the quality of the groundwork. So the detailed geologic mapping, soil surveys, geophysics, that stuff, that's going to help us understand the strike and trend along surface of these shear zones, if you think of it as a line. And then the dip of that is what we target in space. So we're trying to intersect these perpendicular to the shear zone. We know they're near vertical systems. So we're looking at a subvertical shear panel that we're trying to intersect, and we will line the rig up perpendicular to that shear zone. So the shear zones have already been very well mapped in detail, and we've got a really good understanding of the orientation of those before we start drilling. A prime example is Lewiston. Our geologic model from the detailed work we did at surface, we basically were tagging those shear zones within 5 to 10 meters of where we projected at depth and at that kind of nice perpendicular angle. So again, it came down to that detailed initial steps that are critical in the development of the exploration life cycle before you even get to the drilling point. That's going to help us continue to point those at the right shears that we think are mineralized.
Does the structural complexity of the geology as it is right now necessarily mean that there's going to be structural challenges with a potential deposit too, or could you have structural complexity of the geology but a simple structure of the deposit? Like, could those two things go together?
Yes, they often do. We like structural complexity. That tells you have a good plumbing system, right? You've got a good opportunity for fluid evolution in the rock, and that's where you're going to start precipitating out orogenic systems. And so that structural complexity is actually something you kind of look for. And then from there, we study it, we model it, and we start to drill it to define the geometries and the angles of these things. And that's, again, why some of our initial programs have been that shallow drill program. They've never been drilled before. So I would say the complexities, they don't pose as much challenge as they do really pose reward potential once you understand them. And that really comes from drilling.
Mm-hmm. I haven't seen you lose drill holes, although that happened. I'm not comparing it to Nevada, actually, obviously, but it does happen a lot in Nevada. Like, people say, "Oh, the rocks are really tough to drill. We lost a drill hole." How's the situation in Wyoming?
It's great. These are Archean rocks. So, comparing to Nevada is not a fair comparison. Comparing it to Ontario and the Abitibi is a much fairer comparison.
Yeah.
On our last drill program, they were cranking out, 200-foot shifts regularly. So it drills well. It's competent. You don't run into as many of the late stage kind of fractures and faults that you see in Nevada that end up making some of that rock extremely challenging to drill through. So we've been very pleased with that. We actually think that, moving into 2024, now that we've got 2 seasons of drilling under our belt out there, that we can, push the bit and really get our programs done quickly and efficiently as we roll into 2024.
Right. Okay. And that first drill program that you're mentioning, the shallow drill holes at Golden Buffalo, the results came back with some narrow intercepts, as I mentioned at the beginning, most of which not high grade. But then there was this almost 84 grams per ton of intercept, about a meter or something, which, sure, it's high grade, but with coarse gold being hinted at with those acid results, it basically means the whole potential system could also potentially be nuggety, right? Which, again, this one intercept relative to the other intercepts, which are typically below a gram, confirms that that's possible as far as I understand it. So yeah, the nugget effect and grade variability pop up to me here as well. How do you approach that moving forward?
Yeah, no, that's very true. We also have extremely coarse, nuggety, visible gold out of our surface trenching at Golden Buffalo as well. So importantly, that high grade came out of that same main Golden Buffalo shear zone structure. So we're definitely seeing widespread gold fertility with a strong nugget effect. What we've done to tackle that is, again, because we're a very deep technical background, we've focused on actually studying the rocks at hand. We've reran and re-assayed a bunch of the different rocks we have throughout all of the districts to understand gold variability with fire assay method versus screen fire assay method versus photon assay method, which is now being a bit more widely used. And what we see is we do see more variability in the fire assays versus screen fires. The screen fires seem to be a lot more representative, and the photons really seem to match up with the screen fires well. And so as we moved into this season at Golden Buffalo, we have specifically ran as our initial survey or assays the photon assay method, which is proven again through our internal studies to be our most accurate kind of determination on nugget effect. And the reason being is it takes a much larger sample that it runs. And the beauty of it is it's non-destructive. So if you need to re-assay, if you want to run screens on the exact same sample, you have that ability. So it allows you a lot more kind of just ability to check assays, referee samples, and really have confidence in the results you're putting out.
Does it get less nuggety or less great variability at depth, or do you expect it to?
Yeah, that's kind of our current ideology right now with Golden Buffalo. We do think we're in the apex of the system there. Likewise, over at Lewiston, we also think we're in the apex of the system, but we do see a completely different mineralogical kind of pattern at Lewiston versus Golden Buffalo. And what we're seeing there really indicates, again, that the system is probably at depth where we see the broader kind of mineralization horizons that we're really targeting.
Right. Okay. How are you gonna follow all that up this year?
Yeah, so right now, the team's actually busy busting out the geologic model. We just released results from our Lewiston drilling at Heavy Hand, and we're really kind of starting to rate and rank our targets. One of the beauties of a more challenging market is it gives you a little bit more opportunity to really digest everything in your portfolio, rate and rank these things, so that we've got a really clear understanding of where to best spend our dollars, our drill dollars especially, and where we may look at potential, partnership opportunities down the road as we really assess this very large land package we have. So coming out of this season now, we've got over 12 truly district scale targets now, 2 of which have been proven up. And so we're starting to kind of rate and rank those based on market conditions and fundraising capital for the various drilling that we'd like to do this year will dictate exactly where we put those next holes. But at both Golden Buffalo and the Heavy Hand target at Lewiston, we're seeing a really clear-cut opportunity at depth that needs to be tested with the drill bit.
How deep are we talking about?
Well, you think of the vertical depth kind of at both systems. At Golden Buffalo, we got a little bit deeper. I think it was about 200 and maybe 80 meters of vertical depth. And at Lewiston, we've got about 220 meters of vertical depth. A lot of these systems really start to get interesting in that 350 to 500 meter level. We see that in the Abitibi consistently. So, we think the next round of programs is going to target that horizon. What we've seen is that this is shear hosted system. And at Lewiston especially, we're seeing a lot of continuity in our shear zones and in our mineralization kind of throughout those main shear panels.
Right.
So we're excited to follow that up deeper to kind of that 300 to 500 meter depth.
On both of them?
Yeah, both of them need that deeper penetration drilling to kind of see what's below. Again, we have a mineralized system defined. We really think, that the opportunity is deeper in the actual systems we've defined.
Right, but so Golden Buffalo and Lewiston / Heavy Hand, that target there, that remains the focus. Like, you're not necessarily going to all the other targets because you said you have 12.
Yeah, so a lot of the other targets we're going to be working up the pipe. We'll basically chip away. Some of them need a little bit more groundwork, but they all need to then go right into our permitting cycle where we'll work to get them permitted for long-term exploration permits. So as we float into 2025, we'll have optionality across a lot more targets than we currently have. But at Golden Buffalo, we've got the one target, obviously proven up, Heavy Hand proven up. We have 2 other targets at Lewiston, one of which is permitted, and the other one we're expecting a permit by this season. So we do have quite a bit of optionality going into this year's program.
Right. Okay. But then again, if you had to give sort of a gut feel number, what do you think? Like, half of that goes into Golden Arrow, and then half of the rest gets split around, or like, how do you see that?
No, I think for us, it's going to be dependent on the capital we raise. Will dictate which targets get drilled next. We know that Golden Buffalo and Lewiston both need substantial follow-up programs, right? These are proven targets. They would not benefit by being cut short with a small drill program. As a next step, they both need, I'd say, a minimum of 3,000 to 5,000 meters each. So depending on the capital raise we do, will dictate whether we get in and do some deeper holes at one of those proven up targets, or if the financing is lighter because of dilutionary components, then we might consider putting some holes into one of these other district scale targets, like we have at Lewiston, the Burr target. And those are some of the most prolific historic mines throughout our entire property portfolio. So again, really high value targets. They were not permitted to put drill holes into last year. So I often get asked, well, how come heavy hand over that area? Largely, it was just the timing of which ones were permitted. So we do have that ability based on the financing needs to kind of either do more target testing of some of these new targets or get in deeper, which we'd like to do at both Golden Buffalo and Lewiston. But again, the capital needs are different. And so that will be, the large driver for us this year.
I hope we can touch upon capital raising as well here in a minute, but you're mentioning permitting. Since you're in the US, I assume you need state and BLM approval, or like how's that work?
Yep. Yeah. So most of the ground we need state and BLM, but we do have some private patented ground within our portfolio as well. That allows us to really permit just through the state for the most part. So it's kind of a unique opportunity for us is in the sense that we have both. But we've seen it to be an incredible process out there. Both Brian and I have had the fortune of permitting in almost all jurisdictions in North America. And, Wyoming, as far as the US goes, is really an incredible, streamlined path similar to Nevada. And we've felt that our permits so far that we have are long-term exploration permits. And so we've been able to navigate these full EAs in about 6 to 8 months on average.
So how far away are you from having more clarity on the next permits?
So, we've got the one that we're working on, and that is on our patented ground. So that'll just be a state level permit, which is nice. And should be a bit more of a streamlined process. We're already in process on that. And then the next identification of targets at some of the other projects is going to be where we look at where we might focus some permitting dollars this year. Shield Carissa, as far as the South Pass area, looks really good, but Bradley Peak also looks incredible, which is kind of our standalone camp. We've got good targets at both. We're going to be working them both up the pipe. They have different permitting needs, so that'll be kind of a decision that we continue to analyze. We also just got the airborne regional magnetics back. And so we're going to be kind of working that into the model, and that will likely shift our perspective on what targets get, rushed into the permitting queue.
So sort of the chronology of it all would be you first going to come up with targets so that you figure out what's priority, and then you see which permits you need to have to go and get. Then you're going to go and apply for the permits, raise capital, raise those targets, drill those targets.
Yep, exactly. So okay. A lot of the 2024 work on those targets is working them up to that drill ready status.
Right. Is the only connection I have to Wyoming is having watched the show Yellowstone. Is there any, what's the land used for? Is it cattle grazing or something else?
Yeah, so Wyoming is the least populated state in the lower 48, and it's heavily dominated by resource production. So it's everything from ranching and cattle grazing, which is probably the most dominant market, as well as mining. There's a long history of coal mining, uranium mining, trona mining, which is a big resource out of Wyoming. And so you've got this unique network of mine professionals, actually, of a workforce that you don't see typically in these lower populous states. As well as a general society that understands natural resources and natural resource production and kind of society's need for it. And so we've really felt like it's an incredible place to operate. We've got some really great local team members who continue to help us kind of understand the different and best ways to approach things out there. And we're very integrated on a daily basis with everyone throughout that community. But ranching, oil and gas, coal, trona, uranium, as well as gold, right? We've got some other players in the area, US Gold Corp, that's putting in a mine. They've been working through the permit process on getting that developed. And, again, the state has been really illustrating a fairly streamlined path and decision-making there.
You're mentioning that Wyoming does have a history of mining, but it also has a little bit of a checkered history, if you will, with the locals when it comes down to specifically to uranium mining, which is, I believe, to the north of you. So locals, tribal authorities, are they all on board with you drilling? Do you have to apply for any special permits with them? How does that work?
Yeah, there aren't any special permits, right? Because we are on federal ground. Thankfully, the bulk of our projects are not really near any major city centers, any major kind of landmarks or areas of concern. And most of these areas have seen a tremendous amount of historical mining. So mining is not new in these areas. The South Pass area, for example, there was abundant mining from the late 1850s through the early kind of 1900s. The Carissa mine continued on and off production into the early 50s even. So mining is a strong part of the heritage out there. And we've only received support to date thus far.
Okay. Are you asking, by the way, for any uranium in what you're drilling there?
Nope, we are not. And we wouldn't really expect a ton of uranium in these Archean rocks that we're drilling.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, same. I wouldn't expect it either, but I was just wondering if are you asking for any other deleterious elements or arsenic, mercury, something else?
So we run a full suite of geochemical assays across our kind of portfolio of rocks and core samples. And largely, arsenic is a key component of vectoring for orogenic systems, for example. Bismuth, tellurium, tungsten, those are the things of interest to us. We're not necessarily assaying for them because of deleterious reasons. It's because of the nature of relative abundances of arsenic in golden-rich rock is quite a bit higher than the non-golden-rich rock. And you can see that very clearly as you look at the correlation of those elements to gold in our kind of suite of samples.
Right. Okay. But that's still, because I don't think I might check again on the website, but I don't think I saw it in any of the drill tables. Do you think you're going to be announcing that in news releases going forward?
Yeah, so we have not received all the geochem back. We got the gold back, wanted to put that out immediately. We did receive a couple of blips of the geochem, and we released those ones with some of the figures that we put out in that last press release, where you can definitely see that strong correlation to gold. As soon as we get all that back, we will definitely be putting that out. We'll likely put that out with an updated geologic model for the area because our drilling and our data has really refined the geologic understanding of the Lewiston district. And so we'll probably put that out as a whole once we get all of that back and into our kind of 3D leapfrog models.
Fair enough. Where do you send everything for assaying, by the way?
MSA Labs.
Okay, where's that?
So we are working out of their Canadian labs. One of the benefits of that for us is Canadian dollars. Last year, we were with a different analytical group. We saw a lot of headwinds on timing and turnaround, so we decided to switch it up with another great accredited lab this year. And the exchange rate was detrimental on things that we could avoid it, and this was one of those big expenses that we could shift in the Canadian dollar category and get a better turnaround and save some capital on that Forex exchange. So we were pretty happy to do that. American
drillers, though, I assume.
Yep. So we used a new drilling company this year. They did a great job. We got actually quite a bit better drilling rate. And so as far as, the amount of footage per shift. And so we were happy with that because that's what we expected the rocks should kind of return, being Archean greenstone belt rocks. So yeah, we had a good drill company this year. We were happy with the work, and we've got a really good understanding kind of our top to bottom needs as we roll into future drilling programs.
So using the combo there, American Driller, Canadian Assay Lab, what's the all-in cost per meter of drilled and assayed?
Yeah, so drill and assay, I like to think about all-in cost personally, from drilling to assay to logging and producing, the earthworks, because it's all necessary. Drilling and assaying is what we want to think about, but the reality is you got to build the pads, you got to reclaim it when you're done, and so we factor all that in, and we're at about a $500 all in. about 650, 700 Canadian. And again, it depends on the exchange rate of what we're paying in US dollars versus Canadian. And, so that's when we think about all in rates, we try to encompass, what did this entire drill program cost? So how much was it per meter? So a lot of that is again, taking into consideration our rent on our core facility and all of that, because you can't really complete the program without everything.
And right, but that's what I was getting to as well. Is like, what is this whole program potentially going to cost? Because you said 3 to 5,000 meters in each of those two primary targets, at least to
Yep.
give you something back. Let's call it 10,000 meters total, at least. That's 7 million Canadian. And then on G&A, they can talk to me about how much you're budgeting for G&A. But last year or last quarter, it costed you on average about 100 grand a quarter, so you could call it 1.5 million. You're coming very close to your entire market cap here, basically for the year, if I'm getting it correctly.
Yep. Yeah, you are. And that's why we're not looking to go out and raise our entire market cap in one year when markets are soft like this. That doesn't make sense. So we'll continue to be nimble and methodical in our approach, but not necessarily need to raise that capital on a full equity dilution basis either. So we're keeping those options open and considering all avenues for the financings. But at the end of the day, the exploration game, it's long, it's hard. We're in the toughest markets we've seen in a long time. Valuations, I think, are across the board completely depressed. I think there's, creating an incredible buying opportunity across the spectrum of mining equities. And, I think that, that's ubiquitous and we can't control the market. So we just keep focusing on what we can control, which is doing the great work, doing it as fiscally responsible as possible, but making sure we're getting all the right data out of each program so that we can move to the next step.
Outside of fees for keeping the project, do you have anything, do you have to make any payments in terms of options or anything else? Because you had a recent news release about that, I believe.
Yeah, exactly. So, when markets are tough, it's a great time to kind of go back to the drawing board on deals. And we did that. Our Golden Buffalo property, again, where we've got this very high grade at surface and at depth. We had a lease with option to purchase on that with some local operators, a great crew of people. And so we were able to kind of work out a mutually beneficial deal. We really kind of eliminated that lease option in lieu of buying out the property. We bought it out for 1.5 million shares, and we added those gentlemen onto our team, with Jerome Hutchison being our communities advisor and Jake Tyra taking on our operations management. And this is some of the most unique talent available in Wyoming. So we were very fortunate to kind of get that as part of the deal. And that eliminated about 35% of our property burn rate on an annual basis, just in the lease payment itself. Not to mention it eliminated an additional $15 million calendar driven payment, and it kind of retooled that as 11 million in milestone payments down the road. So it really realigned all of our compasses for the greater goals of what Relevant's working out, and in Wyoming towards. And it also helped, bring down that property cost tremendously for our portfolio.
But if I'm reading your financial statement correctly, I saw about a 50 grand a month claim fees to hold on to these projects. Is that still the case going into 2024?
Yep. So our claim fee cost, the claim fee cost will remain the same as far as what we have for our holdings. I think it's about 360 US for our renewals. And, I'd have to get the exact number, but it's somewhere right around that. You do see some of the other costs throughout the years as we have acquired various other packages. But that's kind of our current holding costs on the claim package. So we do expect that. That comes out every year in August is when it's due. And so that's our major holding fee. And then we've got some other small leases out there, that's about 68,000 a year, and another one that is 30,000 a year.
US, that is.
Yep.
Okay. Well, so you're coming up to a little over 50 grand a month Canadian to hold them, basically.
Yep.
Yeah. Okay. Where I'm coming from with this, or why I'm asking all these questions about the fees of the properties and stuff like that, is because if it is and it is a bad market, and if you don't have that 10 or whatever million bucks to do as much exploration as you want to, why still hold on to all of the 5 projects when they're costing you, instead of optioning them out or potentially even selling them to get some cash in?
Yeah, I mean, it's not something we haven't considered and we won't always consider, but at the end of the day, we're defining a mega district, and every piece of data we continue to collect supports the thesis. And so, we've got a board that's beating the table and saying, we definitely don't want to get out of this too early. We don't necessarily know exactly which one might be the biggest and best out there. There's still a lot of work in front of us. So, narrowing the focus too quick, eliminating components of the portfolio that continue to prove to bear fruit and technical merits. We just think it's a little premature, regardless of the market conditions. That said, we're not opposed to broadening our options as far as capitalizing the company in the right ways. So we're considering all the options, but at the same rate, we understand that we've got a big portfolio and we've got big visions for that portfolio, and we're going to continue to chip away at that.
Well, you're mentioning your board there, and there's certainly someone on there who's got big vision or has had big vision in the past, at least. That's Dr. Peter McGaw. Um, he's he's a very busy man, right? He's sitting in multiple boards, running multiple companies, doing 64 different things at the same time. How often does he weigh in on the sort of like what percentage of his time do you think you're getting?
Well, percentage of Peter's time, I don't know the exact percentage because, like you said, he's definitely a busy gentleman. He's a workaholic, not unlike myself and co-founder. And so that's what I would give you as an answer, that Peter's been my and Brian's mentor since university, since even before then. I've known Peter since basically I was born. I always tell people I have the good fortune and misfortune of having him as a mentor, because you got to have really thick skin. He's incredibly blunt and direct, and it served us a lot of beneficial purposes throughout our careers. And so Peter is pretty regularly involved, and unlike a lot of other positions he holds, he's on our board. He has invested his own capital into this. This is not something we're paying him consulting dollars to do. So this is something that he truly believes in, not only in the scope of the project and the district scale systems big vision. That is obviously one of the things that he's been training Brian and I in since university. But he also understands what we're capable of as kind of execution specialists. And so, as far as how frequently involved, he's one of our most active board members. I would tell you that for sure. But we do have a very active board. We've got a very smart board that's done this time and time again. Sarah Weber, she's on the board of Snowline and has been part of that journey. She's brought some of our top shareholders through the door. And Ron Parrott, who's led the discovery of over 20, 25 million ounces of gold in Nevada. He understands, like we talk about the nugget system effect. There's nobody better than tapping into Ron's knowledge for that, of best ways to deal with it, best ways to move forward. So thankfully we have an active board. They definitely they all have a vested interest. They've all invested their own capital into this. We hope that they continue to do so. And yeah, as far as Peter goes, we're lucky to have more time of his than less, I would say.
Fair point. Again, busy man. I hope to meet him one day myself. What about you? You say he's been your mentor since university. What does that mean? What have you been involved in? Is this your main gig right now?
Yeah, so relevant gold is definitely where my focus is. But Brian and I, we've been kind of successful entrepreneurs in the space. We built a number of profitable businesses throughout kind of the minerals resource sector. And some of the earliest stuff with mentorship from Peter, for example, was how to structure it, how to chase our dreams, how to chase these ideas. One of the first things we did was built a consulting firm, Big Rock Exploration, that's got about 75 scientists, 5 offices. And it was really an ability for us to build a profitable business in a down market. B, we were able to align that company with most of the major miners globally. So we really got kind of fast tracked in the experience and exposure of kind of everything from best management practices to tooling and equipment, new technologies, you name it, and built that toolkit, that brain, and that team there, as well as a profit center. And then from there, we really started to focus on developing our own ideas, our own concepts, with relevant gold being at the forefront of our exploration focus. And then we've got a recycling business as well, with that plant going online as we speak. So my focus, Brian's focus, is directly into relevant. It's kind of hard not to be, with a geologic background, even though we are entrepreneurs and company builders, chasing these mega district opportunities throughout Wyoming is pretty exciting, and it's pretty hard not to get involved on a regular basis with something like that.
What percentage of your time do you think you're giving relevant relative to the other ventures?
Yeah, I mean, relevant gets, I'd say honestly about 80 to 90+% of my time. It really depends, but that's the focus. A lot of these other groups are well-oiled machines. Big Rock is handed off to the next generation. They're doing incredible things. They're growing that company, beyond the sights of Brian and I, and they're continuing to accelerate. So couldn't be happier with that group managing our interests there. And then likewise on these other ventures, we've built teams. We're really good at building teams. We've got a bit of a magnetic pull in the industry to get top talent. And really that's how all this comes together is being able to guide and direct some of the top individuals in the industry. But yeah, with my focus being on relevant, I get to do a lot of the obviously traveling and interviews and things like that, but it's really the boots on the ground part. I mean, I'm sitting here before our interview looking at core from just got shipped in from the core shack to take up to PDAC. And, Brian and I are talking about all the minerals we didn't see the first go around that we see now.
But fair. Interesting. I'd like to see that core, but maybe we can do that. Maybe we can do that in the next interview. Maybe we can talk about, hopefully, actually, we can talk about, a whole lot more exploration by then. I think I'm mostly out of questions here, but then again, you talk to Peter McGaw often. He said, what is he asking you that I'm not asking you?
Yeah, I mean, I think that, Peter, again, his background, everybody's like, he's CRD expert. He is the CRD expert. But what I really see Peter as an expert in is big systems. He really understands big systems. He gets into asking the questions about what does it necessitate to identify a big system in an area that no one's ever looked at from that perspective? Because that's what he's done, right? That's why he's had so much success. We call it internally, one of our trademarked brands is New Eyes on Old Rocks. And it is, that's the idea is how do you poke holes in the thesis? And that's what Peter does. He's constantly challenging us to, basically ask the questions about from a technical perspective that try to fail the concept at every step. He's always preached to us that negative exploration is equally beneficial as positive exploration, right? If you can kill the target, that's also a benefit. You stop wasting dollars on it. If you can't kill the target and you got to keep going, then that's also a beneficial thing. So he's always trying to poke holes in the big system potential and making sure that we're looking at it from that perspective, that outside looking in, and also not drinking the Kool-Aid. He's always, encouraging of getting outside experts in, folks that have looked at these systems time and time again, getting opinions, getting second thoughts, making sure that we've got that kind of depth of understanding ourselves, and we're learning as much as possible with every piece of data we pull out of the ground.
All right, thank you, Rob. Hopefully we can sit down again for an overview of where it's all going. But in the meantime, I'm talking to David Kelly, last one for today. He's the CEO of Chakana Copper, a gold, copper, silver exploration company with assets in Peru. Companies listed on the TSX Ventures Exchange under the ticker symbol PERU, so PERU, where an average of about 240,000 shares trade each day with a 52-week high of 10.5 cents and a 52-week low of 3.5 cents. With a market cap of $20 million and 251 million shares outstanding today, this is an 8-cent stock. There are 52 million warrants as well as 10 million options, resulting in 330 million fully diluted shares. Management and insiders hold 9% of the company. Gold Fields holds almost 20% of the company. 25% is in the hands of institutional investors, including Sprott Asset Management, Osisco Development, US Global, and Bali Capital Management out of Switzerland, and a few others as well. And then there's 16% is placed with high net worth individuals, including since recently yours favorite, the public favorite, Rickroll, which leaves about 30% in the hands of retail investors. As of the last interim financial statement, which is dated September 30, the company had $750,000 in cash, $550,000 in current liabilities, and a small portion of a lease obligation in the non-current liabilities side of the balance sheet. That same financial statement also shows that Chakana spends on average about $80,000 per month on all expenses outside of exploration, call it G&A if you will. Whereas over that same period, about $58,000 was spent per month on average on exploration and investigation of the properties, most of which went to exploration support and administrative tasks, leaving the overall G&A to exploration cost ratio at around 1.5 to 1 for the last reported quarter, partly because it's now been a while. It's been almost 2 years since Chakana has drilled this project. So potentially that's going to change this year. And also just please head over to the company's website as well as setterplus.ca to review the most up-to-date financial data by the time you're watching this, because Chakana raised about $3 million since this financial statement was published. So that's not going to be on the balance sheet on this financial statement. That's when Rick Roll came in. So again, the situation will be different. It's your responsibility to follow up on that. Numbers aside, though, I don't want to bore anybody too much, although I'm going to be talking about geology, so people might start falling asleep. Anyways, Chakana's project is called Soledad, and it's located in the Ancash region of the northwestern Peru, as I said. Exploration here has identified high-grade copper and silver in quartz, tourmaline, sulfide breccia pipes that often outcrop at surface. And obviously, to the normal people among us, that means absolutely nothing. So just picture these sort of pipes that are underground. They form when magma intrudes into the Earth's crust, but along the way, it also stirs things up like a bartender mixing cocktails or something like that with a blender, right? So rocks get broken up into little pieces. That's the brecciation part. And tourmaline, being the diva, if you will, of minerals, it sort of swoops in and takes a central stage right in the middle of it all. I don't really think of them as pipes. I kind of think of them as mineral highways that are helping fluids that might be rich in metals and other goodies to intrude into Earth's crust and then be found by the exploration companies. So anyways, there's a few of these pipes or highways that Chakana has drilled so far, and an inferred resource was published covering 7 of them, starting at surface and going as deep as 300 meters. Now, those 7 pipes are said to be mineable in 2 ways, mostly underground, but also partly in an open pit setting, with the underground portion carrying 4.8 million tons of rock at 0.7 grams per ton of gold, 61 grams per ton of silver, and almost 1% of copper. And the open pit portion, again, smaller portion, that carries 1.9 million tons of rock at 1.3 grams gold, 37.1 grams of silver, and 0.65% copper. Again, for the normal people among us, that maybe doesn't say much. So it is in total about 130 million pounds of copper, 190,000 ounces of gold, and 11.7 million ounces of silver. So it is relatively small, but as of now, according to the company, over 85% of the targets had not yet been tested at the time of releasing this resource. So again, this includes only 7 of the in total 110 targets that they have identified across that project. The new permit that Chakana has received recently is, according to the company, exactly what they needed to go and look for the source of those pipes, because again, they have to be coming from somewhere, the highways that I told you about. So hopefully we can see some of that this year, which is exactly where I want to pick it up, Dave, because we haven't seen any drilling for, well, almost a few years now, I suppose. So when do you think drilling will be restarting here?
Yeah, Antonio, the last drill program was 2022, and we're in the final stages of planning the drill program that we've got penciled in on the calendar for March 25th. So just a few weeks from now. It's weather dependent. We're at the tail end of we're going into the last part of the rainy season. We're in a great setting in terms of infrastructure and access to the project. So we should be drilling by the end of this of March, and that drill program will run for about 10 weeks.
Okay, end of March, 10 weeks, 6 to 8 weeks assays from that, and that's when the assays are going to come out then, I assume.
Yeah, that's right. We've got 3,000 meters planned, 3 different targets that we'll be testing on the south side. And it's the first time we've ever had access to drilling on the south side. The reason there's been a delay in drilling on the project is we had a delay in getting the permit to allow us to expand our drill permit to the south onto the southern half of the project. And it's really in that area of geography that what we believe to be the central part of the zoning of the mineral system. We've identified a very large golden soil geochemical anomaly that originally brought our attention to this particular part of the area. And since then, we've done a tremendous amount of work, multiple geophysical surveys, very detailed mapping, alteration studies, and really define the target that we're going to be going after. And that's what we call the mega gold porphyry target. It's not a deep target. It's actually top of sulfides are estimated at a depth of about 125 meters below surface. And then further away at a higher elevation, about 2.5 kilometers to the south of this target, is the La Jolla high sulfidation epithermal target, which we believe is all related to this same mineral system. It's a very well zoned, pronounced mineral system that has what we believe the porphyry environment, high sulfidation epithermal, and then the tourmaline breccia are related to brecciation that came off of the top of the intrusion. And so it's a very robust mineral system. It's part of about 150 square kilometer footprint mining district that's an active mining district that's mostly mining and exploiting high-grade veins and mantos that are lead, zinc, silver in nature. And again, that kind of fits with the classic porphyry copper zonation you see in many districts around the world.
I do want to talk about specifically about the geology and how you're zoning in there. But just before I forget, you said you haven't drilled since 2022, but you still
Yeah.
spend some money again on exploration, getting around 60K or so a month. What was that buying you specifically in the meantime?
Yeah, really refining the targets on the south side, very detailed mapping, alteration studies. As one of the technologies we can, employ these days is hyperspectral mineralogy on core samples, on surface samples, and even with satellite imagery. We did a lot of that work really to define the hottest temperature areas associated with this porphyry target, and also the high sulfidation epithermal target. That type of technology responds or is very applicable to those types of alteration styles. So that was a lot of it, just getting ready, getting surface agreements in place, social programs, which are very important, not only in Peru, but anywhere in the world where you work, and maintaining, good relations with the local communities and our benefit programs and that type of thing. So that's really been the focus of it.
Right. Okay. And the 3,000 meters, to go back to the drilling that you're planning for this year, the 3,000 or so meters that you're going to be drilling, how do you think that's going to be split between sort of looking for the feeder zone and then at the same time also basically further developing the discovery that you made there?
Yeah, so the three different target areas that we're going to be going after includes another high-grade breccia pipe. It's called the Estremadura pipe. It's right on the edge of the mega gold porphyry target, which is interesting in and of itself. The class in this is the breccia that crops out at surface, has multi-gram gold, mineralized breccia with high silver, visible copper oxides, lots of artisanal pits on it. And the reason I'm so interested in this particular breccia pipe is it has the biggest geophysical footprint that we've seen. These breccia pipes just light up with geophysics, and the cross section of this breccia pipe has got a width of about 100 meters, and we can trace that breccia at surface for just about 100 meters. So it's one of the bigger breccias. It's low on the mountain on the south side, so the access is really good. And our existing resource is based on 7 breccia pipes, as you mentioned. Out of if you break out just the breccia targets, the tourmaline breccia targets, we've got 54 targets. The other 50 so targets are different intrusive hosted mineralization targets, high sulfidation epithermal. We've got vein breccias, lots of different types of targets to go after. But these tourmaline breccia pipes we believe that there's potentially between 50 and 100 of these breccia pipes there. And some of them are blind. We've actually discovered a blind breccia pipe in our drilling of an outcropping breccia pipe. There were 2 pipes adjacent side by side. And that was really important learning because these are not volcanic breccias. These are not features that erupted at surface. They still probably had 1 or 2 kilometers of rock, of host rock above them when they formed, and they are only exposed now through uplift and weathering. So if you can find one breccia pipe just fortuitously through drilling, it tells us that the potential to drill and find blind breccia pipes is, must be high, the potential for that. So we'll start the drill program by drilling Estremadura because we want to remind people we're not abandoning, we're not pivoting, we're not switching away from our strategy. We're all about finding high grade mineral resources, and some of the grades we've drilled on this project to date are spectacular. The best intercepts in my career, 12 meters of 27% copper and a kilogram of silver, 439 meters of 2.07% copper equivalent from surface. So just really, really spectacular drill intercepts. The breccia story's got a long way to go. Okay, so we're almost kind of starting to look at this as, okay, we've got huge tier 1 upside potential with the mega gold porphyry target and the La Jolla high sulfidation target, but we still have lots more of these breccia targets to go after. So we'll start on Estremadura, just 2 holes. We've drilled so much in these breccias. We basically need to confirm the grade and get some kind of indication of geometry and size, and then we can move on. The next step will be the mega gold porphyry target itself. We've got 2,400 meters planned for that, six drill holes, nominally planned for 400 meters depth, but we will go deeper if we're still in alteration or mineralization. A little bit about this target. This is the target that really brought Gold Fields in 2019. Gold Fields put in $8 million in a private placement at a 40% premium back in 2019. And it was really on the recognition of the fact that, first of all, there's a big mineral system here. And right in the center of it is this huge 2.5 square kilometer golden soil anomaly. It's defined by a threshold of about 30 parts per billion, gets up to 325 parts per billion, or 0.325 grams per ton. Within that gold anomaly, there's a very, very strong, the eastern third of the gold anomaly has got a very strong molybdenum anomaly that gets up to 54 parts per million in a soil sample, which is that's anomalous in a rock sample. So it's telling us where generally your molybdenum is where you find the hotter temperatures, the hotter alteration. And then, we follow that up with very detailed alteration mapping and hyperspectral mineralogy, which did define a advanced argillic alteration zone, lots of silica flooding. So that target is really shaping up nicely. We then did geophysics, and all of our geophysics has been designed and really planned by Goldfield's chief geophysicist, a guy named Andrew Foley, exceptional geophysicist in my opinion. I worked with Andrew at Newmont before. And we've got a chargeability anomaly that sits right directly inside of this high gold, high moly feature. It's got vertical walls. It has a surface, an undulating surface that looks like potentially the top of an intrusion. It's certainly defining a sulfide shell around a resistive core that is really spectacular. And that is really what we're going after with this first drill program. And it's really why Goldfields has been there since 2019. They participated in every single financing we've had since then, including the most recent one, both the first and second tranche. So along with Rick Rule, we had Goldfields coming in and putting in money again. And then south of there, we've got this high sulfidation epithermal target. It's called La Jolla. It's a very impressive. It's got a strike length of about 700 meters, and it's worth commenting that we're just 35 kilometers south of PERU, and PERU is a world-class mined out now, world-class high sulfidation epithermal deposit. By definition, high sulfidation epithermal deposits are related to porphyries, and we are in a large land position that affords us the ability to test the porphyry We've got high sulfidation epithermal, alteration confirmed in all the work that we've done, and then we've got these tourmaline breccia pipes on top of it. So those are the three different target areas we plan to go after in this next round of drilling.
Maybe you can expand on that as to how you pick your targets, maybe specifically, because those breccia pipes are obviously interesting, but some of them are mineralized and some of them aren't, or potentially aren't, and some are thick, some are thin, but you can't really know before you drill them unless they're outcropping. But you cannot go and blindly drill them because it's not cheap, obviously. So yeah, I mean, what's the main tool or technique that you use for drill targeting here?
Well, if they're outcropping, it's fairly straightforward. I mean, the first thing we did when we got on the property was, very quick reconnaissance mapping, identifying all the breccias at surface. There's 103 breccia outcrops at surface that we've mapped in, very detailed mapping. And in some cases, a breccia outcrop represents a breccia pipe. In other cases, there might be two or three smaller breccia outcrops that collectively represent a breccia pipe. Okay, and we also at that same time blanketed the property with very detailed soils, and we have residual soils here by and large. We do have a little bit of creep. It's fairly steep mountainous terrain. But by and large, residual soils that are coupled with the geology below, which means that it's a very reliable indicator of the proximity to mineralization if you have a soil anomaly. And the two, really, the gold is the best pathfinder for us because gold is relatively immobile in a surface oxidizing environment. It's very residual, so it hangs out at the surface where it originally occurred. Molybdenum is similar. Molybdenum doesn't move very far in an acid oxidizing environment. Copper, on the other hand, is very mobile under acid oxidizing conditions, and that's why you have these spectacular supergene enriched copper deposits globally in the right environment. And we've done enough drilling on our breccia pipes. We can have 300 ppm in the first 30 meters of a breccia pipe and then go into 3% copper. That's how dramatic the leaching of copper is in this environment. So we like to see copper. We like to see copper oxides or copper in veinlets or indications of copper at surface, but we don't need to see it. If we've got a gold anomaly in a breccia, we've got 100% success rate in that turning into a mineralized breccia of significance. Okay, the exposure is critical. If you've got, obvious tourmaline breccia, shingle breccias with gossinous, appearance and anomalous gold, that's, a primo drill target right there. If you bury that a little bit, we have a lot of the 54 targets we have are areas where we see sericitic alteration, fracturing sericitic alteration. We might not see the tourmaline breccia, but we might have very low level gold, anomalous pathfinders, and a geophysical expression. And those are a second generation of targets. And so those are very, very important targets for us to test as well. But as you might suspect, if you're not seeing the breccia at surface, well, then you're relying more on remote techniques to identify the target, and therein lies higher risk. When you start drilling blind targets, they can, oftentimes your success rate is lower, but they're still worth testing because, as we've already demonstrated, the north pipe at Breccia 1 is a completely blind breccia pipe. Had no breccia, there's 125 meters of rock above that's altered, but it's not mineralized like the breccia is. And as soon as you get into the breccia, you come into this environment where the rock was broken. I love your blender analogy. That's a really good one to describe a breccia. But the important thing from a mineralization standpoint, is the hydrothermal fluids flow very readily in that broken rock. And then when it gets to to the margins of the breccia pipe, the rock is very impermeable, and so that fluid ponds there, and that's where we get some of these spectacular grades. 12 meters of massive sulfide. It was 90% chalcopyrite, and it was because those hot fluids are ponding against the contact zone of that breccia pipe and just completely replacing the rock with very high grade mineralization.
Mm. Is the idea that these breccia pipes are sort of like arms or rivers that come out of somewhere, supposedly one central location, can call it a feeder zone? And do you believe they get thicker the deeper they go, or is that not necessarily the case?
Yeah, we believe that, and we've demonstrated it to a certain degree. You mentioned our resource. The average depth of our resource, which is where we have a lot of drill indicated information, is about 330 meters. But we've drilled 900-meter holes in on the project, and we have deep. We've never seen the bottom of a breccia pipe yet, and we've had hundreds of meters of breccia in these deeper drill holes, and we've never found the bottom of yet. They're not all mineralized or strongly mineralized, or maybe they're strongly mineralized with pyrite. We've got a breccia pipe, breccia 3, that has 10 to 30% pyrite in the breccia pipe. It has pyrite crystals the size of your fist. It's really spectacular, but by and large, it's not carrying high grade copper, gold, silver mineralization. We believe that that particular pipe, which is also one of the biggest that we've drilled so far, that potentially is what might be considered the pyrite zone of a zoned cupola, a zonation. Oftentimes you get pyrite, and then inboard of the pyrite closer to the heat source is where you find the copper sulfides.
Right.
So that's very much a live target that we need to go after. But yeah, no, these some people use the analogy of like fingers on your hand, okay? And the breccia pipes represent these conduits of broken rock sitting above the intrusion. The palm of your hand would be the intrusion, and these breccia pipes have ripped up vertically off of the intrusions. We have dated the rocks in the district, and we've got 20 age dates, geochronology age dates of various types of molybdenum and rhenium, or rhenium osmium dates on the molybdenites, and then uranium lead dates on the rocks. And we've pinned this mineral system down to right at 15 million years is when everything starts to happen. Okay, so these are really young geologic features. So these breccia pipes, they sit in essentially their pristine, upright, vertical position. They haven't been rotated or faulted or deformed or separated by later events. They're really they're essentially sitting the way they formed 15 million years ago. And ironically, or interestingly, that's the exact same age as PERU. So it's at the 35 kilometers to the north, the world-class PERU high sulfidation epithermal deposit was forming at the same time that the intrusions were coming into our pile of older rocks. Crystallize these intrusions sit there and crystallize, and it's during that crystallization process that all the volatiles accumulate in the top parts of the intrusion. We don't think it's like one big intrusion like this with breccia pipes coming off the top of it. We actually think there are multiple intrusions. So there's an intrusion here where the porphyry target sits. There's intrusions in cupola zones sitting beneath the other breccia pipes on the north side and on the south side. We've got a spectacular breccia pipe cluster on the southwest side of the project called the Compañero Breccia Complex. That we have not drilled yet, and that has up to 14 grams gold in channel samples on the tops of breccias. Really spectacular. We're really excited. We're not going to drill that in this round of drilling. It's part of community-owned land that we're working on the community access for. We have great relations with this community. It's just another part of the series of other targets that we'll be testing as the project goes forward. But these breccia pipes are related to intrusion. What we've demonstrated is that at surface, you might have a breccia pipe that's only 25, 30, 40 meters in diameter. But as you go down and continue drilling, they actually go like that. We've used the analogy of an inverted carrot, where the tip of the carrot's at the top and it gets bigger. We think ultimately that the size of the breccia will be related to the size of the cupola of magma that's sitting at depth beneath these breccia pipes.
Is the geometry and the orientation of all those breccia pipes the same, or does it differ a lot?
They differ in size, and they're generally, they range in diameter from 25 meters to 100 meters. Okay. They probably average about 60 meters. If you look at like the ones that are in our resource, there are three really big pipes out of the seven, and there are three pipes. Actually, we have one. Paloma East is enormous in size, but it's not carrying a really strong grade at the level that at the depths that we've drilled it so far. But they're variable, but they're all vertical generally. None of them sit at angles or anything like that. They're all sitting vertical. We do have some indication that the stratigraphy that they sit in is dominantly an andesitic tuff, okay, which is a very soft rock. It's dominantly, made up of clay-sized particles and lithic fragments, and in some places crystal phenocrysts that are in the tuff. But they're flat-lying, fairly impermeable, soft rocks. But at depth beneath that, there's a massive andesite flow. We think it's about 400 meters thick. We've not seen the bottom of that yet. It's an iron-rich host rock that's very dense and very difficult to break through. And the fact that these breccia pipes were able to bust through that layer is tells you how much energy was associated with these breccia pipe formation. But we have one breccia pipe that as soon as it hits that unit, it corkscrews and it turns and twists and goes off in a different direction. And we think that that's part of the response to this tremendous amount of pent-up energy being accumulated in the top part of the cupola of the magma, and it ripping through that. And once it hit that, it created a divergence in the energy direction, and it screwed around, but it really literally just corkscrews down into at depth, and it's getting bigger as it's doing that. So that's an exciting feature that we think potentially could add lots of tons in the eventual mining of these breccia pipes as we go deeper, where you're going towards the energy source, towards the heat source. We have some spectacular grades. I have drill core that I show at PDAC and other events of, very multi-percent copper mineralization at 700 meter plus depths in Breccia 6. So, there are so many intercepts like that have not been followed up, but I'm confident that if this becomes a mining operation, those are the kind of things that the miners will have to chase for many, many years to come.
All those pipes, or a lot of those pipes, as you mentioned, though, occur sort of in clusters within a relatively small area. Does that have any implication now for drilling, but also, like you're mentioning here, later on for mine planning or in terms of extraction efficiency or something?
Yeah, I mean, that's a really good point. We have, I would say on average, the spacing of the breccia pipes is, maybe you could throw a number out there like, they're spaced roughly 250 meters apart. And that's kind of a general rule. On the north side, there's a high density of breccia pipes. As we come down the mountain, we cross a major regional fault. It's a fault that goes from the coast all the way up across through the Ayahuasca district that we're in, goes through the valley and across to the Cordillera Blanca, and it daylights just north of the Antamina pit. Okay, it's called the Curicocha Arc. It's a arch. It's a major trans. It's an arc normal structure. It's a rip in the crust. So you've got a subducting slab, and that slab, as it gets deep enough, it starts to generate melts. And those melts will stay there if they don't have a pathway to rise up into the crust. And the easiest way for these magmas to get into the shallow crust, where they can actually form uh, mineral deposits, porphyry deposits, high sulfidation epithermal deposits, other deposit types, is to come up along these arc normal rips or tears in the crust. And this structure that goes right through the middle of our project is one of these big arc normal tears in the crust. And so as you go down into that elevation on our project, you get into much more of an intrusive environment. We see much larger outcrops of intrusions. They're pre-mineral intrusions, but they're part of the mineral system. That intrusion that I'm talking about is dated at 15 million years. It's what kicked off the mineral system that we're exploring today. That was the very first event, and then there was another intrusion, and then there was a rhyodacite, a third intrusion, and then we had the mineralizing intrusion come in because the breccia pipes ripped through those three previous pre-mineral intrusions in this older andesitic lava flow and the lithic rocks, the tuffs, and we can track all of this geology because we can map the clasts that are inside of the breccia pipes to tell us what rocks were present when that breccia pipe formed. So the breccia pipes are the very last event to form in the district in terms of setting the scene for the mineralization. And then the very last event, of course, was the fluids migrating from that intrusion at depth, those variable cupolas in different locations, into this broken rock and mineralizing it. And importantly, it produced a mineral called molybdenite. It's a moly sulfide, iron sulfide mineral, and that mineral can be dated with isotopic methods, and that gives us the end date of we've got the start date and the end date, and so we've really pinned down this mineral system in terms of how it formed.
Those alteration processes that occurred basically around the breccias, that's interesting that you'd mentioned that, because in some of the written material on the website, you also mentioned the sharp contact and well-defined halos around those breccias, which is the alteration part, I suppose. But you mentioned that they indicate sort of distinct boundaries and might potentially influence the continuity of mineralization within those pipes, and I don't know, potentially making it more challenging for you to chase mineralization here, or how do you deal with that?
Yeah, on the breccia pipes, the alteration footprint is fairly narrow. So the entire project is what we call propylitically altered, green rock. Okay, it has lots of chlorite and carbonates, and it's a lower temperature distal alteration associated with in many mineral systems, but it's particularly characteristic of porphyry copper style mineral systems. Okay, and we see that very distinct. In fact, our cutoff for what we teach our geologists is when you're in the green rock and the sheeted veining is stopped, you're done. The drill hole's over. Unless you want to push it further to see if there's an adjacent breccia pipe, like we see at Breccia 1. There's two breccia pipes there. But we have to have some reason for that. We don't just say continue drilling for 100 meters just because we might get lucky. We have to have some geophysical reason to continue the hole, but we have done that on a number of occasions. And we actually have seen some very spectacular mineralization in the wall rock that we've never followed up. Copper replacement, massive sulfides on structures outside of the breccia pipes. That's another kind of target feature that, needs to be followed up on someday. But when you come back to the alteration footprint of the breccias, you go from mineralized breccia to a very sharp contact with the wall rock. Inside the breccia, it's quartz, tourmaline, and sericite and sulfides. That's it. That's the mineral assemblage. When you hit the contact, you have really a very pronounced sheeted veining into the wall rock, and it's fairly narrow. It's like, 3 or 5 meters into the wall rock. Really strong quartz sericite veinlets. A lot of times that's not strongly sulfide bearing. So we actually think that's like a pre-brecciation feature where you started, the system was starting to go unstable and it was about to erupt, if I can use that analogy. Again, it's not an eruption at surface, it's an explosion off the top of a crystallizing intrusion. And it's starting to lose its ability to keep and contain this immense amount of pressure. And we start developing these sheeted veinlets and they shoot up above the cupola. And then once that system starts to go unstable, it explodes and it rips up vertically. It brecciates this sheeted veined rock that is kind of a preliminary precursor stage, and that explosion is what creates the breccia pipe. And the size and height above the intrusion are all most likely related to the size of the cupola at depth. The bigger the intrusion, the greater accumulation of volatiles and the greater capacity to produce lots of damage. Okay. Now, here's the important thing. The next thing we see is the rocks falling down into the cavity that was formed by the breccia pipe. We actually have uh, lots of proof that the fragments have moved downward instead of going upwards, okay, at the level that we've drilled them. Now, if we get down close to that intrusion, we actually might see breccia class moving up. And one of the holy grails of breccia pipe exploration is to look for evidence of mineralized porphyry class in the breccia pipe itself. And I tell you, when we started drilling these breccias back in 2017, 2018, every single major copper company in the world was beating on our door because they wanted to look at the class and they wanted to see if they could find these mineralized porphyry class in the breccias. And we've never seen them. And I think it's because we're still high up in the breccia pipes. I've never seen potassic alteration. It's actually a bit of debate with our geologists whether or not there was potassic alteration that's then been retrograded and overprinted by sericitic alteration. Academic argument really, but I can tell you we only ever see sericitic alteration, which is a lower temperature alteration. Potassic alteration usually indicates that's minerals like potassium feldspar and biotite is usually how that's identified, and that indicates you're really close. You're right in the system. You're right on the heat source when you start seeing those alterations. We've never seen that yet. And I think we will as we go deeper, but we haven't seen it yet.
But you are seeing multiple sulfide and sulfur salt minerals within those breccias, right?
Yes, absolutely. And this is another really interesting part of this story is that in the breccias, and we are talking a lot about the breccias today. I wanted to talk about the porphyry target too, because I think that's where we're going with this, right? We are going to be swinging for the fence and going after this porphyry target. But within the breccias, our dominant copper mineral is chalcopyrite. Okay. That's the mineral you want. I mean, nothing, bornite's the holy grail if you can find bornite because it's just such a higher grade copper mineral. Or chalcocite, which is generally a supergene enriched sulfide mineral that's very high grade as well. But chalcopyrite is the dominant mineral. We've never seen enargite. Our breccia pipes are not what you might consider to be high sulfidation style of mineralization. We get chalcopyrite and pyrite, and then we get sulfur salt minerals, and there is generally where we see the silver minerals. We see some very interesting minerals like belangerite and bornonite, minerals that I wasn't even aware of when we started working on this project. We have tetrahedrite, tenantite, series minerals that again carries lots of silver, can carry lots of copper as well. We get a mineral called cosalite, which again can have very high bismuth and very high copper and silver as well. We get arsenopyrite in the very top parts of some of the pipes. We think that each one of the breccia pipes represents kind of its own little zoned uh, mineral mineral deposit environment, if you will. Hot at depth, copper, silver as you get higher, copper, gold, silver, and then gold, silver, and related pathfinders at the very tops of these things. It's generally, a fairly, maybe it's 100 meters, 150 meters cap at the top of the breccia pipes. And we think that that's telling us something about the preservation of the original breccia pipe that formed. Many of our breccia pipe, like breccia 5, 6, Paloma East, Paloma West, don't have that very strong gold silver epithermal overprint on them. We still get decent gold grades, 1 gram gold and 50, 60 grams silver and copper. We just don't have all the other pathfinders associated with it. And we think those are pipes that have had the tops eroded off of them, maybe 200 meters or something like that. We don't really know. We think each breccia pipe had its own ultimate elevation of the top of the pipe when it formed, and that was based on structure and yeah, energy, how much energy, how big the intrusion was, it's related to a depth. So it's a bit tricky. You're kind of looking for these conical shaped ore bodies that are coming off of intrusions at depth. And the blind ones, of course, are at different elevations at, in the ground because, they formed independently of each other. But we think that they all point down to a mineralized intrusive environment. And the breccia pipes themselves, because they're young and they go straight up, if you simply draw a circle or an oval around all the breccias that we've mapped at surface, that's telling you the outline or the spatial extent of the intrusions at depth. And so anywhere within that oval shape, and it's about 4 kilometers by 3 kilometers at depth, you can expect to find the intrusive source for these breccia pipes. But because of this big arc normal structure that I mentioned earlier, it allowed the intrusions to intrude to a higher level than it normally would. And therein lies the opportunity for this mega gold porphyry target. It's not a deep target. On the north side, if you want to find those intrusions, yes, you're probably going to have to drill deep. How deep? We don't know. We've drilled 900-meter holes and we have not seen the causative intrusion on the north side. But you got to remember, the mountain is going like this. Okay, as you get up here, you're already 300 or 400 or 500 meters above the valley. But as you go down to the valley, you get much more into the intrusive environment. And we think that big fundamental regional structure is what allowed the intrusions near and proximal to that structure to ascend or intrude to a higher level.
I understand you didn't necessarily maybe want to talk about the breccia pipes here, but where I'm coming from with this is specifically when I'm asking whether there's multiple sulfide and sulfur salt minerals. Clearly not a geologist here, so I'm barely hanging on. But what I'm thinking about here is the mineralization complexity of it all and how that might relate to the potential feeder zone or center that you called there.
Yeah, I think I think you get that's a really good question. That's a difficult one to answer. I mean, I think the mineral complexity primarily has to do with the source fluids and what minerals and metals they're carrying in in the hydrothermal fluid, and then the time, the residence time that those minerals precipitate out of the fluids. We do see multiple pulses of fluid in overprinting relationships. One of the very interesting things that we see is we see a late copper event, and that copper event will completely wipe out everything in its path. It's a late stage copper replacement event. It's basically chalcopyrite. And when I mentioned that massive sulfide, that 12 meters of 27% or 90% chalcopyrite, that was a replacement style of mineralization. So, and that's coming off at the very end. We've got great examples of overprinting relationships of that style of mineralization. And, late stage copper, that's one of the things I learned from working at MMG. And a guy named Marcus Tompkinson, who's an expert in particularly IOCG styles of mineralization, in that look for late stage copper replacement. And when you start looking for it, you start finding it more often than not. And we see that in spectacular examples in these terminally breccia pipes. And again, that's another reason I get so excited about the copper potential of this project. If we can find the conduits and where those fluids are coming from, oh my goodness, the host of that style of mineralization could be absolutely spectacular. Okay, so there is complexity for sure. Now, I just realized I forgot to finish the story. We talked about copper, chalcopyrite. We talked about silver and sulfur. We haven't talked about gold yet. Now, in most copper gold systems, the gold reports to the copper minerals. Okay, it's very common to see, 0.x grams of gold hanging out with chalcopyrite or bornite associated with the mineral itself. And, generally you produce a copper con, that gold goes with it, you get paid a gold credit, you lose a lot of the value for it, usually. But, it's there. Our gold is actually free gold and electrum, okay? Gold, silver, and pure gold, and free form. Okay, we see blebs of gold and pyrite, kind of on the 20 to 100 micron range side. Very good size for leaching, for recovery of that gold. Potentially gravity concentration of gold in the plant might produce good results on some of the breccia pipes, but it's clearly a separate event. It's not associated with the copper event. So it kind of makes the project a little bit unique in that regard. We see positive benefits because our very, very preliminary metallurgical work indicates that much of that gold is recoverable by leaching. And if you can leach your gold and produce a doré product on the project site, you're gonna reap 98% of the value of that gold. Whereas if it ends up in a concentrate or a byproduct and it goes off-site, then you lose a lot of the value of that. So we think that's a positive thing. Not all the gold is leachable. There's a lot of metallurgical work that needs to be done on this project. We do have some refractory nature sulfides, and we think that can be cracked with, looking at some sulfide oxidation, low-cost sulfide oxidation technology. But none of that work has really been done to any great extent. We are funding a PhD study of our complex mineralized breccias through Codes University with a very talented young Peruvian geologist. And so that's adding lots of knowledge to the project, and I think will pay dividends down the road.
You also mentioned bismuth back there. Now, I'm going to forget about it if I don't ask about it right now, but I also wanted to ask about assaying for deleterious element in general, so arsenic, mercury, bismuth, and so on and so forth.
Yeah. Yeah, so and just a little bit of background. I am a geologist. I have 2 degrees in geology, but my master's degree from Colorado School of Mines was specialized in geochemistry, and particularly in exploration geochemistry. So if I had to be faulted for anything in the way I explore, I do tend to go a little overboard on the geochemistry, but I think it pays dividends. I mean, the blanket soil survey over the entire project very quickly tell us the size of the mineral system, the footprint, where the breccia pipes were this giant. At the time of the discovering the mega gold soil, now we didn't know what it was. Goldfields looked at it and said, "What is that?" And we said, "We don't know, but we're going to find out." And today, that's the mega gold target that we're going to start drilling in 4 weeks' time. So But all of that work, multi-element ICP, MS, super high sensitivity, I don't know, 54 elements, something like that. We do gold by fire assay, which is the traditional way to do gold. We do gold on a 50-gram sample instead of a 30-gram sample because it's just more representative. You do have to be aware of the nugget effect of assaying for gold. It's really important. So we do everything we can. Our QA/QC program is second to none, and I insist on that because of my training as a geologist. But yeah, we analyze for everything, and I can tell you, we do see high bismuth in places, and we do see high selenium in places. We see anomalous tin in tungsten. And I was just watching one of your other interviews about tectonic and induced IRGs, and reduced igneous intrusions, Fort Knox type of deposits, Donlin. Those have never been identified in Peru. They tend to have a more reduced character. Instead of being an oxidizing magma, they tend to be a reducing magma. They're great for carrying gold. They generally don't carry a lot of copper. So, we're kind of looking at this, scratching our head. Okay, we do see indications of reduced nature in the element suite, but we have all this copper, and copper is usually associated with oxidizing magma. So how does that play out? But we have entertained the idea that the mega gold target isn't a classic, oxidizing magma with copper gold and moly. There are generally two types of porphyry systems. There's copper gold systems and there's copper moly systems. There are a few in the world, and Bingham is probably the greatest example of a porphyry that has gold, copper, and moly. It's if you make a ternary diagram with those three elements on the vertices of the triangle, Bingham sits right in the middle. It's one of the greatest examples of one that sits right in the middle. And there's lots of technical discussion as to why that is. But we see copper, gold, and moly on our project. We see bismuth and selenium. We even see tellurides, tellurium, and we see anomalous tin and tungsten. So we're scratching our head about this, going, maybe this is a big giant IRG system, intrusion-related gold system. And I would be fine with that too, Antonio. I mean, I'm out there to find an ore deposit that creates massive wealth for the shareholders, the stakeholders, the communities, and turns into a mine. That's what drives me and motivates me. I'm not motivated by, the money aspect or whatever. True geologists and explorers in this industry are really driven by the hunt of we're glorified treasure hunters, if you will. We apply science to the best of our abilities. It is fundamentally a scientifically based discipline, but really the goal is to find something that turns into a mine and you can associate your name with.
And that's where you send potentially they're hoping to find that porphyry source or the porphyry that's driving those breccias. Yeah, we didn't talk too much about it, but as far as I understand it right now, that's again you're swinging for the fences.
Yeah.
What happens if you don't hit that far out? Like what happens if there is no porphyry? Do you still think this project has merit based on the breccias and what we've talked about here alone?
So you're saying, what if we hit a triple instead of a grand slam, or something like that? We've already hit a triple. Okay, we've already put a high grade resource that's open in depth. We picked those 7 breccia pipes to drill out to a limited depth extent from surface, really to demonstrate the concept, really to give us a starting point to evaluate this project. Sometimes people will make a discovery and then they'll go out and they'll drill a very coarse grid over the deposit, right? And they'll get an inferred resource, and that inferred resource might paint a picture of, say, 75% of what the ultimate resource ended up being. It got better with time because they drilled some of the higher grade areas out and that added value. And some of the stuff they thought was going to be in the pit didn't end up being in the pit. but we specifically did not call this a maiden resource because we have no idea how big this system is ultimately going to be. First of all, we've got still 54 breccia targets to test, of which Estremadura will be the very next one with multi-gram gold and copper oxides and artisanal workings on it. So we know that that's going to add to the story. But we've already got a great project, and we've got enough information. We just completed an internal scoping study. It's not something, it was really just meant for us to inform the board and ourselves about what's the value of what we've already got, and is it worth doing a PEA? Is it worth updating a mineral resource on the breccia side of the story? In addition to Estremadura and, within these 54 targets that we have remaining to test, we have the Compañero breccia complex, multiple breccias at in a small area and very, very high grades, 14 grams gold in a channel sample. There's 5 breccias in very close proximity to each other. And you mentioned that earlier, and I was talking about the general spacing being 250 meters, but we get these areas in we call them breccia complexes because there's multiple breccias in a small area. And we think it's like the fingers on a hand, but the fingers are much closer together. And what we demonstrated at Huancarama, we had 5 breccias there at surface as well. And and they're all separated by wall rock in between the breccias. So they clearly are individual breccias. And we started drilling there, and 3 of the breccias on the east side coalesced into one big breccia pipe. And we've always identified that as one of the potential game changers in exploring breccia pipes, is that if the breccias get close enough together, as you go down the breccia, you're going towards the energy source, right? You're going to where the damage gets, greater, where the energy was greater. And so what's the potential for these small, skinny breccia pipes to turn into bigger coalesced breccia pipes that then turn into big mega breccias? We have this concept that as we go getting around the intrusion, there potentially could be these concepts of mega breccia, intrusion size giant breccias that are also mineralized, and cutting through those or coming up off of those big mega breccias are the individual breccia pipes themselves. And as they get further and further away, they start to break up into little bitty, conduits themselves, and they get closer to surface and they peter out. So that's part of the story. And the Compañero breccia complex is one of those. Very high grades at surface, multiple breccias in a small area, potentially could coalesce into a much, much bigger breccia as we drill that.
But you're essentially financed for this 3,000 meters that you're doing this year.
Yeah.
Do you think that's going to be enough to answer that unanswered question, as in, is there real merit to that thesis of finding that source?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and no question. We are fully funded for the 3,000 meter drill program. A little bit of drilling on the Estremadura breccia, probably just 2 holes, 200 meters, 2,400 meters, 6 holes. We'll go deeper if we have to. If we're in alteration and our mineralization, we will keep drilling. The rig we have at site, it's got a capacity of 700 meters of HQ, which is the big diameter drill core. It's another one of our favorite things to do on the project. Bigger samples, you get better geology out of bigger core, and you get better samples to go with your better assay methods that we utilize for just for more robust numbers. But yeah, 2,400 meters to test that mega. Now we have. How much could we drill? When we sat down with Goldfields and did our targeting workshop and planned the drill program, they were like, "You got so many targets, you should be drilling 5,000 meters alone on mega gold." And we said, "Well, we agree, but we're right now, Antonio, we're in one of the worst capital markets certainly I've ever seen in my career in the junior mining sector, and I'm not alone in saying that. It's brutal out there. It was very difficult to raise that money, even though we've had gold fields in our corner since 2019, seventh largest gold producer in the world. You know, they're kind of topped out, right? They can participate up to 20% of any financing, but then they can't carry the bulk of the load. But having Rick came in, helped us come in, helped us tremendously. This is the third time he's invested in our company. It's not the first. We didn't make as big a deal out of it as we did this time, but we should have, because once word got out that Rick is in, then the financing closed up very quickly and very nicely. And, Rick he doesn't throw money around. He's a very astute investor. He relies on some exceptional technical experts, guys like Neil Adshead and Justin Tolman, two outstanding geologists, PhD educated, very, very successful careers of their own. We have John Black on our board. John is a very, very successful economic geologist, but we've had multiple technical input on the project. And to see Rick come in again for the third time was very gratifying, helped us finish that off. But we do have enough money to test those three target areas. But yeah, and what if we hit it out of the fence? You only have to look at Hercules Silver as an example of a small, probably undervalued junior explorer that was out drilling. They were going after high grade veins. Well, okay, we're going after high grade brecciates. They thought that their veins were related to a porphyry, and we think our brecciates are related to a porphyry. They drill one hole, deeper hole, intersects. I can't remember what the numbers were. 285 meters of 0.97% copper in porphyry style mineralization, and boom. I mean, they went from, a $10 million market cap a year earlier to, I think they made it up to over $200 million market cap. They've settled down now to about 160. Barrick immediately stepped in and financed them to the tune of $24 million. And now they've got access to all that technical support, much like we have access to all the technical support from Goldfields. So we're one drill hole away from a similar outcome, in my opinion. And I think no one has orated that better than Rick Rule himself. And he understands the risks of exploration. He knows that exploration fails most of the time, but he doesn't invest in junior miners because he might be able to double or triple his investment through a very secure, risk averse type of investment. He invests so that he can get the 10, 20, 30 baggers. And I can tell you that our project has exceptional potential. There's no guarantees in this business, but all you can do is do your technical best, have good partners, try to raise the capital that you need. And I am super excited that we're able to test this target at this point in time. It's taken us longer than we had hoped it would. There are lots of reasons for that. There was COVID. There was just a crazy, political, divergence that the country went through that's now completely resolved. And, the radical president that was elected now sitting in jail where he belongs. And the country's back to focusing on building up its mining industry, and it's doing really well. It's number 2 in the world in terms of copper production, and that production is increasing each year. So yeah, this is a great opportunity to tell the story and to get people interested. We are swinging for the fence, and we may hit that grand slam. If we don't, we still have a very, very exciting project of high grade copper, gold, silver, mineralized breccia starting at surface, open at depth, huge upside potential just on that side of the story in an active mining district. Okay, we're right in the heart of active mining. There's a portal to an active underground mine that's only 500 meters east of our property boundaries. So it doesn't get any better than that, in my opinion.
I understand you're excited about this, and I would be worried if the CEO of the company wasn't essentially you're the spokesperson for this company and you have to bring it out there like that. But then at the
Yeah.
same time, I look at the last news release or one of the last news release, and I see, warrant extension, sure, but then also lowering the
Yeah.
prices on those warrants.
Yeah.
If you think there's so much upside potential, what's that all about?
Well, as I mentioned, we're in extremely difficult capital markets right now. I mean, even with success, there's no guarantee that I mean, there are lots of examples out there where people have put out outstanding drill results, and the market has just not responded to it. Hercules Silver had the advantage that they didn't already have a strategic investor in their corner. And so Barrick was able to come in a big way, right? We already have a big heavyweight in our corner with Goldfields. And, the great thing about that is we have Goldfields in our corner. The downside to that is that they can only put in X amount of capital, they can maintain their position in equity position in future financings. And we've let them top up to 19.99, but they're almost there right now. They're at 18.4, right close to that. So the amount of capital we can get from them is somewhat limited. But really, I mean, it's just brutal out there in terms of where can you go and get capital. It used to be the private equity firms are who you turn to, and we've talked to a lot of private equity firms. They love the project, but they're not investing right now. Royalty companies, same thing. All the royalty companies want to buy producing royalties or near producing royalties, so again, many of the royalty companies, and we've got the best royalty guy in the business as our chairman, Doug Silver. And, royalty companies are not I mean, there's examples of royalty companies buying their own stock back right now rather than investing that in new royalties. So that tells you how difficult the market is right now. Retail investors they're sitting on the sidelines. There's lots of dry powder. That's good. That's a good thing. So when we do kick off the next super cycle, I do think it's going to be reminiscent of the last super cycle. But we sat down as a company and said, okay, if we're successful, we're going to need more capital. Can we rely on capital markets to go out and do another financing? And will we be rewarded for that? Will it, we've already got recent warrants that were part of this last financing, and that was tremendously dilutive. It was very disappointing that we had to finance at that point in time, at that price level. And we looked at the warrants that were about to expire. Those warrants were going to expire before we get drill results back. So, we knew that the right thing to do was to extend the expiry date, and we didn't push them out 2 years. We pushed them out 5 months, enough time to get all the drill results back. And then we considered, well, do we leave them at 20 cents? When we spent all of December trading at 4 cents, or do we lower those to a more reasonable price point? And it's still 14 cents is 3 times what we just financed at. It's 50% higher than what we're trading at right now. So we kind of felt that it was warranted to make those changes. We only did it for the interest of capitalizing the company at what will be a critical time in its pursuit of bringing good investment returns to our shareholders. If we discover what we hope to discover in this next round of drilling, we are going to need capital, and it's just another source of that capital.
But essentially, this is not like money that you think you're going to be using for G&A or an option payment or something else. You just think if we make a discovery, then we can act quickly on following that up with more drilling. That's what the money is potentially going to be used for if the warrants get exercised.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, we do have property payments, and that's part of our normal course of business. And we raised the money this time purely for drilling, to go after these targets, and that's what we're going to do. We have two 100% purchase option agreements that we're halfway through in both cases. And we've had very, you know, good partners in the sense of flexibility. They understand that, you know, these are difficult times. They know that our intentions are good. We're doing good work, and we have a vision for where this project could go. So we continue working that angle and talking to them, looking for flexibility and how those agreements can be modified if they need to be. If we knock it out of the park and we hit that grand slam, I really do think there's going to be a water flood event that's gonna elevate you know, our company and you know, our opportunities much higher. It'll create that visibility that we, you know, need, I think, in this market. I think you really have to have good shareholders and people behind you, but you also have to have the much broader recognition that this project is has exceptional potential. And there's nothing better than a drill hole in a new discovery that has scale potential to remind the market that, yeah, these things still can happen. It's a lot more difficult to make tier one discoveries today than like it was when I started my career, you know, 35, 40 years ago, but they do still happen.
What would making that discovery or having success with this drill program, what would that mean for your relationship with Barrick? I mean, you're close to it. Would that get them more
Yeah.
interested? Are they interested already? How does that change your dynamics?
That's a great question because, you know, Goldfields owns 18.4% of our equity, yet the Mega Gold target and La Jolla targets and Compañero sit on Barrick concessions. And by the way, those were Barrick concessions that were staked originally by Arequipa Resources back when Arequipa Resources was picking up their 9 properties in the Cordillera Negra, one of which ended up being PERU. So there's some real interesting historical aspects of this ground and who's been interested in this ground, and the likes of David Lowell, you know, entrusting his Peruvian geologist team to go out and pick up good pieces of ground, and this was one of the pieces that was picked up at the same time as Fiorina. So it's interesting. Barrick, I mentioned that we have 2 purchase option agreements, but the Barrick agreement is there are no payments or no costs associated with it. We have to drill 4,000 meters on their ground and produce a PEA, and they have a one-time back-end right to come in and buy back into the concessions, their concessions. There's no AOI. It doesn't include anything to do with the north side of the project where the Breccia resources exist today. Any of that. It's only on their 3 concessions, and they have to pay us 3 times what our total expenditure on those concessions has been. Okay, so that's how they back in. If they don't back in, then they revert to a royalty position, half of which can be bought down, and we get 100% ownership of the concessions. Okay, so let's say that we do make a major discovery on the Barrick ground. Well, what does that mean? Well, our partner in Goldfields, who's been with us since 2019, owns 18.4% of the company, and we sit on a new discovery on Barrick ground, of which they have, within a 4-year period of time, which just started in July of this last year, they have a one-time back-end right. So I think it would put us in the middle of a very interesting situation. You know, if you use the analogy of an Oreo cookie, we're the filling in the middle, and the 2 sides of the cookie are Goldfields and Barrick. I think, I don't know what will happen, but I can tell you, we've set that up nicely too, right? We have exceptional partners on the project, and they appreciate the management team we have and the technical expertise that we've done. And they also appreciate the aggressiveness. We started with just 1,000 hectares on the very northern side of the project where some of those spectacular breccia pipes were. But we knew there were many more breccia pipes going down the mountain to the middle of the valley where that big structure sits. And then we found more breccia pipes on the south side, plus lots of alteration. Plus knowledge that those claims were originally staked by Arequipa Resources. So we went from 1,000 hectares to over 4,000 hectares today. And that's what junior companies need to do to secure opportunity. And all too often, a junior will get a little piece of ground and then they'll start flogging that piece of ground as the next greatest discovery opportunity, but they won't go out and do the hard work to consolidate the mineral system, the geologic opportunity. And that's what we've done. So I don't know. I don't know what's going to happen when we drill that discovery hole, but it's going to be interesting.
Well, good. We've been at this for a while now. I think we've discussed a lot. There's always a whole lot to talk about. Clearly, you like talking about the rocks, and I appreciate you trying to help my 5-year-old brain wrap its head around it. So thank you for that. What am I forgetting to ask you, though? What else should we be talking about here?
Well, I think you've done a great job, Antonio. I mean, this is a very technical story, and you're right. I do like to talk about the rocks, and I've been faulted for that a little bit too much. I like your analogies and simplifying this and presenting it in a more understandable way to the non-technical audience out there. It is a very technical story, though. I mean, tourmaline breccia pipes are not that they're actually very common in porphyry districts along, I mean, from, southern South America all the way up into Alaska. We see these tourmaline breccias associated with lots of porphyry districts. A lot of times the breccias just get mined in conjunction with the porphyry mineralization. You never really hear too much about it. The Los Bronces, uh, uh, um, district in Chile has the biggest copper reserve in the world. It's 252 million tons of contained copper, and half of those resources are hosted in tourmaline breccias. It's the granddaddy of all tourmaline breccia systems globally. We do get asked a lot, how would you mine these breccia pipes? And our vision of the project is that you could take off the tops of the breccia pipes in very small little starter pits. It'd be very simple, easy, low cost mining, and the grades are, very, very strong. So your margin on the open pit mining is very high. That margin pays for the development of underground mining, and you're off to the races. And probably the best analogy I can provide for what a mine here on the tourmaline breccias would look like is what you see in the Diavik Diamond District, and that there are multiple pipes. They come to surface. They're vertically extensive. They have different sizes and geometries. They all have little starter pits. The bigger ones get developed into underground mines, and they're variable grades, variable geometries, but they're fairly close together. And in my presentation, I show an example of how that mine was built with very similar geology, totally different commodity, different environment of formation. They're not hydrothermal deposits, but still, from a mining standpoint, it looks like it could potentially be very similar. So I like to point that out. But you talked about the exploration potential. You talked about the existing high-grade resource and how many more targets we have to go there. We're in a great location in Peru. We believe Peru is a mining country now and always will be. Things are looking good for Peru in terms of its political stability. And, even all the noise, the political noise that's happened in the past, it's never really changed the copper output in the country. We have a graph that shows all the various changes in administration versus copper production, and copper production continues. The biggest impact to copper production in Peru was COVID, and that affected everything. And Peru was devastated by COVID. It was very, very hard on that country in particular. So we're glad to see that things have returned back. Mining is a very, very important contribution to their economy and their well-being, and we like the thought of us being part of that.
Well, again, Dave, I appreciate your time. I appreciate the explanation. You're setting some pretty big goals, making some pretty big claims for yourself, again, swinging for the fences, as you said, and exploration is a risky business. So to everyone listening and watching, pay close attention to that and further your own research. But yeah, Dave, I appreciate your time. Thank you for sitting down with me.
Thank you, Antonio. Really enjoyed it.